Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot. Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
The proceeding will start shortly.
Order. Order. Questions to the Secretary of State for the Home Department, Debbie Abrahams.
Number 1, sir.
Secretary Sajid Javid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have regular conversations with Cabinet colleagues on a range of matters. The deal that I considered this week confirmed the UK and the EU's commitment to a new partnership and included a transition period. In considering the way forward, we must focus on ideas that deliver the same benefits and are genuinely negotiable and have sufficient support in this House.
Debbie Abrahams.
Title 5 of the draft withdrawal agreement describes the ongoing police and judicial cooperation between the UK and the EU in criminal matters. Given that it has taken 30 months to agree the 13-page section on security, and that this only covers the transition period, why should we have any confidence in this government to have completed negotiations that ensures this country's future safety and security by the end of next year?
Mr. Speaker, security is an absolute priority for the Home Office, and that's why it should come as no surprise to the House that all capabilities that the UK would wish to cooperate on with the EU are covered in the political declaration. And if the Honourable Lady to continue that kind of cooperation, the best thing to do is to support the deal.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What estimate has he made of the intervention by Sir Robert Dearlove and General Guthrie?
I read that intervention carefully, I think it was a week ago, and I think whilst I have huge respect for those two individuals and listened to them on many issues, I think they were completely wrong in their assessment.
Yvette Cooper.
Mr. Speaker, the last time the Home Secretary appeared before the Select Committee, he told us that in the event of no deal, and I quote, "we will be as safe if we are talking about the SIS2 system, for example, as we were just now, and that SIS2 is merely a nice to have," and those were the words that he used. Since then, the Met Commissioner has said losing access to SIS2 will be more costly, undoubtedly, slower, undoubtedly, and potentially, yes, put the public at risk. And the NCA has also said there is a risk that the country will be less safe as a result. What is his assessment of the risk to the country in policing and security terms from no deal, and why is it different from that of the police?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Lady will know that in the political declaration, that in, I think in Article 87, it talks about how the UK and our EU partners will work together to consider continuing arrangements for missing and wanted persons and other issues such as criminal information exchange. I am confident that with the assessment that we've done, today we are very lucky to live in a very safe country, and whether we have deal or no deal, we will continue to be a very safe country.
Mr. Speaker, the arrival of 39 suspected migrants in crossings in just the last 2 days is a considerable concern to my constituents in Dover and Deal. Can I ask the Home Secretary when he will next meet his French counterpart to discuss this matter, whether round-the-clock aerial surveillance is something the Home Office will do urgently, and can he confirm the date on which the two cutters in the Mediterranean will return to be on station to secure our borders?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to raise this. Aerial surveillance is already a measure that we have started deploying on the English Channel since I declared it a major incident. And also, whilst we are awaiting the arrival of two cutters for early February, we have increased the presence of vessels, including with help from the Royal Navy. And in terms of meeting my French counterpart, Minister Castaner, I will be meeting him this week.
Mr. Edward Davey.
Further to the question from the Chair of the Select Committee, Mr. Speaker, the police have said that direct access to EU databases like SIS2 are mission critical for their work tackling criminals and terrorists. What guarantee can the Home Secretary give to the House today that after the transition period, Britain will still have access, the police will still have access to these mission critical databases?
Mr. Speaker, where I agree with the right honourable gentleman is that they are important databases, and that's why I think it is also a very good outcome that in the political declaration we have an agreement to consider the arrangements of how we can keep using this type of arrangement. And again, Mr. Speaker, if the right honourable gentleman is that concerned, he should support the deal.
Isn't it the case that our closest security and intelligence partnership is with the United States and the Five Eyes signatories, none of whom are members of the European Union, that our closest defence partnership is with NATO, not with the EU, and that whether we leave the EU with or without a deal, we will be signing a security and intelligence arrangement with the EU?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right to highlight the absolute importance of the security relationship we have with many other countries, including, of course, our Five Eyes partners, which is an absolutely critical and important relationship, and also the NATO alliance. That doesn't take away from the fact that we also want to continue cooperating with the EU, and I'm sure that we will.
David Hanson.
Mr. Speaker, but could the Home Secretary just help me, please? The European Court of Justice has oversight of the European Arrest Warrant and of SIS2 and of Europol and of Eurojust. He says we will have arrangements with all of those three. How does he therefore cross the Prime Minister's red line on those issues?
Mr. Speaker, that's quite straightforward. If the honourable gentleman takes time to read the political declaration, he will see that it talks of establishing arrangements, for example, arrangements for speedy, for quick and efficient surrender of individuals. So they're not exactly or necessarily the same instruments. We've done it in a way that is consistent with us taking back control of our laws.
Diane Abbott.
I've listened with great care to the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary will be aware that the EU insists on treaty arrangements governing key aspects of international security, justice and policing. Without a treaty, courts have no legal basis to implement arrest or extradition warrants and cannot allow access to criminal and other databases to third countries. The danger is there'll be a mutual loss of the European arrest warrant, and the UK will no longer be able to access the Europol database in real time. How does he justify putting the security of the nation at risk in this way?
Mr. Speaker, the government has suggested to the EU, and this is still as part of if the deal gets through Parliament, as part of the political declaration, this is what will be looked at, is having an internal security treaty between the UK and the EU, because as the Right Honourable Lady quite rightly says, that it is best to have these arrangements on a proper legal footing, and it makes sense to have that through a treaty type arrangement. But again, Mr. Speaker, I have to say, if the Right Honourable Lady is really concerned about continued cooperation, she should support the deal.
Mary McCarthy.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have provided £3.6 million for a new National County Lines Coordination Centre to enhance the intelligence picture and support efforts to identify and safeguard victims. The centre launched in September last year and carried out its first week of action in October, leading to more than 500 arrests and more than 300 people safeguarded.
McCarthy.
I was pleased to see reported recently that the government is treating the victims of these county lines as victims of modern slavery. I think that's a very helpful approach. I have two concerns though. One is that children who have been excluded from school are particularly at risk, and also in terms of housing, if children are at risk, what conversations is the government having with its counterparts in the housing department to make sure they're not housed back in the area where the people who've persecuted them live?
Thank the Honourable Lady for her continued focus on modern slavery. And she's absolutely right. This isn't just about policing. Of course, that's a vital part of our treatment of serious violence and county lines. But it is about a holistic approach as well, which is why the Home Secretary is chairing the Serious Violence Task Force, which brings together local government, national government, all of the agencies concerned who can make a real difference in the lives of young people who may be vulnerable to those gangsters.
Lee Hughes.
Mr. Speaker, in November, West Midlands Police were granted a cash boost of £1.8 million to help them deal with gangs and violence. So, does the Minister endorse the work of the charity Red Thread, who are working to prevent youngsters from joining gangs and therefore becoming drug dealers?
I'm delighted to endorse the work of Red Thread. This is a charity that we support not just in the Midlands but also in London and in Nottingham. I've been delighted to visit A&E departments where Red Thread are in operation, and the key is they reach out to young people when they're in accident emergency departments at what they call the teachable moment, and it's exactly the sort of positive voluntary work we need.
Vicky Foxcroft.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister update us on the Government's public health approach to tackle serious violence? I am not asking for an update on the serious violence strategy, nor the offensive weapons bill, nor the Youth Endowment Fund. I've been following these very closely. However, I can't find anything on the Government's public health approach announced at Conservative Party conference. So perhaps a Minister could update us now.
Well, may I thank the Honourable Lady, who is assiduous in her focus on this important topic, and indeed I'm grateful to her for her work on the Youth Violence Commission. We are due to consult on the public health duty, which is a legal duty which will apply across the board to help encompass a public health approach in our treatment of serious violence.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's really clear that the war on drugs isn't working in the light that there are so many fatalities both within the criminal justice system and within the community. So can the Minister set out what steps she is taking along the public health framework to ensure that fatalities are reduced and that public health workers work together with the criminal justice system?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. She will know that we have announced very recently an independent review into drugs to look at the drugs market in the 21st century. And indeed, only last week I had the pleasure of visiting a drug treatment centre in South London to see the important work that doctors and health professionals do in helping those who are sadly addicted to these very harmful substances.
Louise Haig.
Mr. Speaker, for the victims of county lines and youth violence, the trauma from their experiences will be devastating. Yet far too often, police forces and mental health trusts are not working together to make sure their needs are automatically assessed, leaving children extremely vulnerable and at risk of being re-exploited. Will the Minister commit to working with her colleagues in mental health to ensure that all such victims receive an automatic referral to mental health services? And will she commit to coming back to this House at the earliest opportunity with a full update on progress against the wider serious violence strategy?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady, and she will know that we are very conscious of the impact that mental health can have, not just on the immediate victims of serious violence, but of course the ramifications further afield for communities affected by serious violence. There's a great deal of work going on to help people with mental health issues who are being dragged into county lines in particular, and indeed my right honourable friend, the Policing Minister, met the relevant Minister in the Health Department only last week to discuss this.
Tracy Brabin.
Number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister Nick Hurd.
Mr. Speaker, in the year to June 2008, the proportion of recorded crime that was closed with no suspect identified was 47%, a similar proportion to the previous year.
I think the Minister is seeking to group this question with number 13.
Certainly am. Thank you for reminding me, Mr.
Very good. Thank you. Well done. Tracy Brabin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charge rates in West Yorkshire have fallen in some key crimes. Sexual offence charges are as low as 4%, amongst the lowest in the country. The National Police Chiefs Council Chief has said this is down to fewer officers and staff. The decision by government to raise money via an increase in council tax means West Yorkshire will raise almost the same as Surrey, despite having double the population. Will this really meet local need?
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady? And I'm sure, given the seriousness of the point she raised, she will welcome the fact that prosecutions and conviction for rape and sexual offences are at their highest ever level. She moves quickly on to the issue of funding, and she wants to see more resources for her police force, which means I hope she will support the current proposed police funding settlement that will, if the PCC uses the flexibility, add an additional £28.5 million to her police force.
Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Hampshire, just 4% of sexual offences now results in a charge. Just 14% of robberies. Can the Minister honestly tell the people of Portsmouth that after losing 1,000 police officers and a staggering £70 million in central government funding, my city streets are safer?
The honourable gentleman again comes back to the conviction rates on rape and sexual offence, which are at record levels. They are low in percentage terms, so they're unacceptably low, but we are making progress. It's incredibly important we do, because one of the success stories of the last few years has been in encouraging vulnerable victims of so-called hidden crime to come forward. And I hope he would welcome that. And I hope, given his concern to see Hampshire Police properly funded, that he will vote for the current police funding settlement that will see police funding for his fourth double.
Pritchard.
The Minister will know that in Telford and Wrekin there's currently a call for an independent inquiry, but also a council-led inquiry into unresolved crimes around child sexual exploitation. Would the Minister of State join me in calling upon the Council to get on with that inquiry and also to release the information in order that the victims can finally have justice?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for that. In fact, he's raised it before and he's heard a message from this dispatch, but very clearly from the Home Secretary around get on with it. And I repeat that. I'm more than happy to offer him and anyone relevant a meeting to discuss.
Goldsmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honourable members will know from today's papers that there's been yet another stabbing in London, this time in my own constituency in Kew. I'm pleased to say that the victim is expected now to make a full recovery, and I want to thank the local police for their full and rapid response. But can my right honourable friend acknowledge, please, that increasing crime in the capital is a source of huge anxiety, and can he reassure my constituents that getting to grips with it is not only a top government priority, but that he's doing everything he can to work both with the Met and with the Mayor of London on a coordinated and full response?
Minister.
I can certainly give him that assurance because it's one of the biggest public safety challenges we face as a city and as a country. I speak regularly with the Met. I'm meeting with the Mayor later this evening to discuss this in person. He wants more resources. There's an additional £100 million of investment going into the Met Police this year, and the proposed funding settlement will see additional £172 million public money going in to support the Met, alongside all the other work we're doing on the Offensive Weapons Act and Stop and Search and everything else he'd want to see. I can't think of a higher priority for the department at this moment.
Question 4, Mr. Speaker. Minister, Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to group this question with questions number 6, 11 and 17. On the 19th of December last year, the Government published a white paper which set out our principles and plans for a future skilled-based immigration system. The future system will focus on high-skilled, welcoming, talented and hard-working individuals that will support the UK's dynamic economy, enabling employers to compete on the world stage.
UK.
Honourable friend for his response. When we leave the common fisheries policy, as he will be aware, we take back control of our waters and our fish. We can expect at that point an expansion to the seafood processing sector in my constituency of Banff and Buchan, an area of very low unemployment. Can my right honourable friend therefore assure me that our future immigration policy will facilitate the sourcing of skilled seafood processing workers from outside the UK if required?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to highlight the opportunities that Brexit will bring for certain industries, and the immigration white paper, I can assure him, does contain proposals to bring medium-skilled workers within the scope of skilled workers, and also to introduce a temporary workers route at all skill levels. So I hope that offers him some reassurance.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Mr. Speaker, would my right honourable friend assure me that the skills-based immigration system will not fall foul of an arbitrary salary cap? This is particularly important in many sectors, and I declare an interest as on the board of a university in research. Often very highly skilled researchers are not paid anything like $30,000 at the beginning of their career, but we need them for our university and research sector.
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise this issue. That he may know that last year we made a visa offer that we have for academics even more generous, and those changes have been warmly welcomed by the research community. I can assure him that we will engage with employers in the higher education sector and others before we determine any future salary thresholds.
Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Chichester is home to a fresh food industry worth £1 billion, and these businesses rely on European workers. One grower in my constituency reached 1.5 million picking hours last year, and with no mechanical alternative to picking soft fruit, any restriction in accessing labour will curtail growth. Can my right honourable friend assure me that our post-Brexit immigration policy will ensure businesses such as these will be able to get the workers that they need?
Mr. Speaker, I understand the importance of the fresh food industry to my honourable friend's constituency. We are piloting a scheme to bring in workers from outside the EU to work in this industry, and our immigration white paper proposes a temporary work route allowing workers to come to the UK to work in jobs for up to a year in any skill level.
Sturdy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Secretary of State assure me that he will listen to North Yorkshire farmers in the agricultural sector who wish to retain access to seasonal workers after Brexit? And can he confirm how the pilot will be assessed going forward and changes to numbers will be reviewed?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell my honourable friend, first, the pilot will test the effectiveness of our immigration system at alleviating seasonal labour shortages during peak periods of production, whilst ensuring that there is a minimal impact on local communities. So we will fully assess the outcome of the pilot, but I'm happy to give him the assurance that he seeks.
Ellen Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is impossible to consider the future of the immigration system without considering the injustices that the immigration system has meted out in the past. In relation to the compensation scheme for Windrush citizens who have been unjustly and unlawfully treated by the Home Office, is the Home Secretary aware of reports that unscrupulous law firms are approaching Windrush victims seeking to represent them in relation to the compensation scheme on the basis of a commission rate of more than 25% of the compensation awarded? Will he condemn this utterly predatory and exploitative practice? And will he take steps to ensure that 100% of the compensation awarded by that scheme when it is finalised will go to the victims who have already suffered enough?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, it's very important that we have a fair compensation scheme in place, and the work that Martin Ford QC has done independently has been excellent, and we will be announcing more on this soon. But I will also join her in condemning these unscrupulous firms who are thinking only about lining their pockets and not the victims of this.
Janet Davey.
Say what progress he's actually made regarding the compensation towards victims from the Windrush scandal.
The Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker, will know that the consultation on this recently closed. It was extended at the request of Martin Ford, the independent chairman that was appointed to look into this. We are now just working through that, working across government, and we will be announcing more details on it soon.
C. MacDonald.
Tens of thousands of families have already been split apart by the Prime Minister's draconian anti-family immigration rules. How many more families will be destroyed by his proposals to extend these rules in future to EU family members? Shouldn't we be getting rid of these rules rather than extending them?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman may be aware that in the withdrawal agreement, in the Prime Minister's deal, there's an extensive section in there on guaranteeing citizens' rights. I believe what we have agreed with the EU is very generous. No one has any interest in splitting any families. We must do everything we can to welcome those EU citizens that have made their home in the United Kingdom.
Carmichael.
Can the Home Secretary tell us how the settled status scheme will work for EU nationals, ordinarily resident in the United Kingdom, but working in the offshore oil and gas industry or the merchant marine? Can he confirm that the fact that many of these people may work for more than 6 months in the year outside the 12-mile limit will not be a barrier to their inclusion in the settled status scheme?
Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that we have been piloting the scheme is to look at any issues that might come up before the full launch, which is expected to be in April. The recent pilot has just closed. We've just published results on that today, and it's precisely to look at issues such as the one that the Right Honourable Gentleman has brought up, and we'll be looking into that carefully.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning, the government launched the largest stage of the settled status rollout. If just 5% of those who need settled status fail to apply, 175,000 people will be in the UK with an insecure immigration status or no status at all. The British Medical Association found that 37% of EU doctors are not even aware of the settled status scheme. What is the government doing to make sure EU citizens know they need to register for settled status to avoid a repeat of the Windrush scandal?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman might be interested to know that from the recent test, where we've just published the results, is that we have found that over 30,000 of the 30,000 applicants, 70% were granted settled status, 30% were granted pre-settled status, none were refused, and almost 80% said that they found the application process very fair and easy to complete. So the process is working well. He's right to highlight what it might look like once it's fully open, but we are making sure that through a huge comms campaign, working with employers, for example, as well. I visited such an employer, GSK, just last week, that we get through to everyone who needs to know about the scheme.
The Government is committed to using the detention estate sparingly and only when necessary. We have taken a systematic approach to modernising and rationalising the immigration detention estate, ensuring the geographical footprint and resilience required to meet our future needs. By this summer, the detention estate will be almost 40% smaller than 4 years ago and of significantly higher quality.
May I welcome very much the closure of Camps Field, something that I have been campaigning for a very long time. However, it happened very quickly, and so there are now lots of workers who are worried about where they're going to find their jobs. And the local community are desperate to know what's the plans for the site once it's been totally run down.
Well, I'm glad the Honourable Lady identified her involvement with the Close Camps Hill campaign, and I'm conscious that she was at many of the protests calling for the closure of Campsfield. We are, of course, developing options for the future use for the site following the end of the contract, which was in any case scheduled to end in May 2019. Although deployment of Mighty staff is a question for Mighty themselves, they have provided assurances that they are actively engaged with their staff on redeployment options within their business. All detainees have been transferred to other centres where they will be held in decent and dignified conditions.
Alison Thewlis.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady has raised the question of how the EU settlement scheme is working, and of course we know that EU citizens make a huge contribution to our economy and society, and we want them to stay. The first 2 phases of beta testing have now successfully concluded, and the wider public implementation of the scheme has gone live today.
Mr. Speaker, I've received a worrying pattern of news about EU citizens in my constituency being denied universal credit because they are deemed not to have the right to reside. This is happening despite the DWP having access to work history records and other evidence to the contrary. Is this an example of the hostile environment extending to EU citizens before Brexit has even happened? And will the EU settlement scheme have any impact on this?
Well, the EU settlement scheme is a really crucial part of making sure that the 3.4 million EU citizens living here can absolutely evidence their right to stay here through a digital status in line with 21st century requirements. You will have heard my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, talk in positive terms about how important this scheme is. And of course, we've now opened the final phase of testing before the whole scheme goes live at the end of March.
Maria Miller.
The Government is right to be working hard to secure a Brexit deal, but if no deal is reached, can my right honourable friend reassure EU citizens living in our county in Hampshire and elsewhere in the UK that they still have their rights guaranteed? This is important and it needs to be clear, not just to citizens but also to businesses as well who employ them.
I thank my right honourable friend for that question. And picking up on the final part, we launched back last summer the Employers Toolkit to enable employers to best communicate to their employees the settled status scheme. She's right to point out the concerns that many may have about the event of no deal, and I'd like to reassure her that across government we are working incredibly hard to avoid a no deal outcome. Of course, the Department for exiting the EU were very clear about the protections afforded to EU citizens in the event of no deal, and we believe that our offer to them is generous. And deal or no deal, the scheme will open publicly at the end of March, and it's crucial that as many citizens as possible apply.
Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister knows that this is an increasingly complex area, and I've had many letters from constituents concerned of those who have been impacted by the immigration surcharge, the health surcharge. Who is going to have to pay this, and is it going to be increased along the lines that has been foreshadowed in the press?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that we did increase the immigration health surcharge and that was an important manifesto commitment that this party made to make sure that those who are using NHS services are also contributing to it. The settled status scheme has deliberately been designed to be simple, not complicated. It's really important that EU citizens only have to prove their identity, prove their residence, and indeed confirm that they don't have criminality. In the second phase of private beta testing, it has been very plain that the vast majority of people going through the scheme, I believe in the region of 80% or so, have been able to confirm their residence of 5 years without any reference to additional information other than their HMRC records or their DWP record.
Mr. Speaker, as somebody who's married to an EU citizen, may I say I think these proposals are entirely fair and proportionate, and are in marked contrast to the outrageous scare stories that were put about by some people in and out of this House who are fanatical about remaining in the European Union.
Well, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I am sure that his wife will be going through the process very soon indeed. In fact, some of the best advocates for the simplicity of the EU settled status scheme have been those who have already gone through it, and we've had very positive feedback in the first 2 phases of testing.
Number 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government's Immigration White Paper sets out the principles of an immigration system that will work in the best interests of the whole of the UK. As my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has made clear, the White Paper is the start of the conversation. I look forward to ongoing engagement with stakeholders in Scotland over the course of this year.
The Federation of Small Business Scottish Policy Chair has said, and I quote, "The UK Government's obstinate approach to immigration is a clear threat to many of Scotland's businesses and local communities. These proposals will make it nigh impossible for the vast majority of Scottish firms to access any non-UK labour and the skills they need to grow and sustain their operations." So, is he wrong?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman is right to point out the importance that we have engagement with business groups and stakeholders across Scotland. I was delighted to meet with the CBI in Scotland in a business roundtable back in the summer, and that engagement will continue. But I would also like to point out to him that the Independent Migration Advisory Committee were very much of the view that Scotland's economic situation is not sufficiently different from the rest of the UK to justify a very different migration policy.
Yes. Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister not accept that the idea of a skills-based immigration system is undermined by having an arbitrary salary threshold, and that should be scrapped in favour of an actual honest assessment of the real skills demands across different sectors in the economy?
Minister.
Well, I would gently point out that this wasn't an arbitrary salary threshold, but actually was the one put forward by the Independent Migration Advisory Committee. But it is, of course, important that we engage with business and employers across the whole of the United Kingdom, and will be using the next 12 months in order to do so.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend, the member from Linlithgow and East Falkirk, has already referred to the concerns of the chair of the Scottish Federation of Small Businesses. The Chief Executive of the Scottish Tourism Alliance, Mark Crothall, has said there is no doubt that the Government's plans will considerably exacerbate the existing recruitment crisis in tourism and put Scotland's tourism industry, which is one of the most important economic drivers for Scotland, in severe jeopardy. Is he wrong as well?
The honourable lady will, of course, be aware that the Migration Advisory Committee, who are, of course, independent of government, made the point that they did not see the case for a wide range of sectoral schemes. In fact, made the case that perhaps only in agriculture was one appropriate. However, it is important that we continue to engage across all businesses and all sectors, and I'm sure she'll be delighted to know that the tourism industry in Wales have already beaten a path to my door. I look forward to Scotland doing likewise.
Clearly, the tourism industry in Scotland are very unhappy with the proposals, and I beg to suggest that maybe they know more about their industry than the Migration Advisory Committee. But the reality of the situation is that people from businesses across Scotland are dismayed by the UK Government's approach to immigration. Now, Scotland already has different policies and approaches on taxation, climate change, tuition fees and social care. If these major areas of policy can be devolved and implemented to suit Scotland's needs then why can't immigration be devolved? And I'd like to know the Minister's views rather than the Migration Advisory Committee's views.
And I'm sure the Honourable Lady recalls my appearance at a select committee in front of her where I made it very clear that the Minister's views are that immigration policy is a matter that is reserved for the United Kingdom Government.
Or a Pidcock.
Number 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, response times to fire have increased gradually over the last 20 years. At the same time, as the Honourable Lady knows, the number of fires and deaths from fire has thankfully fallen. There is no clear link between response times and firefighter numbers.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and thanks for that response. But last month, a report by Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services found that fragmentation is resulting in a postcode lottery of 999 response times and standards, which simply isn't fair on the public or firefighters. What steps is the Minister taking to introduce a consistent national framework of standards across fire and rescue services to provide a proper benchmark against which inspections can take place?
Well, what the independent inspection showed, inspecting effectiveness of our fire services, that 10 of the 14 fire services they inspected were rated good for effectiveness, including response to emergencies. What we're doing in terms of driving up standards and finding out what good looks like is independent inspection, creation of the standards board and robust local accountability, including the chance for local police and crime commissioners to take over of governance. It's that framework that will drive up standards across the fire service, which is what everyone wants.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rising response times aren't the fault of firefighters, chief fire officers or local politicians. They're the result of this government's austerity agenda, which has led to 10,000 fewer firefighters protecting our communities. We have council leaders such as South Yorkshire, I'm sure the Minister is aware of, where £12.5 million have been slashed since 2010, explaining to the Minister that this government's austerity measures will risk the public's safety. They've made that clear. Will the Minister explain how sustained cuts to fire service budgets, forcing a reliance on small one-off, unearmarked, note the distinction, unearmarked reserves, provides a sufficient basis for a responsive and well-resourced service, and whether he'll commission a review?
What I say to the Honourable Ladies, we have fewer firefighters because we have 46% fewer fires over the last decade. What I'd also say to is what I said to all the fire chiefs this morning is I'm absolutely determined that in the next CSR that the fire service gets the resource that it needs to continue to be world class.
Anna Soubry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I met the Chief Fire Officer and the Chair of the Fire and Rescue Authority in Nottinghamshire on Friday, and they made no complaint about their funding level. They've had to make a series of reductions, and they've done it extremely well without any risks increasing at all to the people of Nottinghamshire. They do want to make sure that their funding is retained, and I don't expect the Minister to comment on that, but could he agree with me that our fire service have done remarkable things with cuts in their budgets without any risk to the public at all?
Of their spending power, and I repeat to her what I said to Matei. I'm determined to make sure that in the CSR our fire service is properly resourced.
Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has concentrated on bringing law enforcement together alongside regulators to ruthlessly focus on tackling dirty money and economic crime. In the next 18 months, we will invest over £48 million to bolster capabilities, including the establishment of the National Economic Crime Centre.
Davis.
Does my right honourable friend agree with me that by bringing together specialists across both the public and private sector to tackle this, we can use the best of our experience to maintain our status as a global financial centre?
Yes, I agree with my honourable friend. It's in all our interest to ensure that our financial sector and country tackles financial crime. The global scale of it demands that all of us must play our part to burden share, which is why the Serious and Organised Crime Strategy last year specifically committed to ensuring the widest response from both government and the private sector.
Simmons.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. A year ago, the government introduced unexplained wealth orders to tackle the laundromat of dirty money in this country. It's reported that the National Crime Agency has identified 140 cases in which such an order would be appropriate. But how many orders have actually been imposed in the last year? Only one. Why is the government so afraid of using the tools available to it?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving me the opportunity to clarify both some of his remarks. First of all, they were introduced, weren't enacted till April last year, so it hasn't been a year they've been used. There's been 2, not 1, used. And at the same time, the Criminal Finance Act also brought in to existence asset freezing orders. We have seen since April in 1 year asset freezing orders being used 200 times alone in the Metropolitan Police, freezing over £40 million. And I assure him the use of unexplained wealth orders will continue, but as he will know as a lawyer, the courts and the judiciary have to get used to understanding, we have to understand how the courts interpret the legislation. But don't worry, the asset freezing orders are doing their job, as well the unexplained wealth orders.
Jenkins.
Andrew.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Number 15.
Question number 15. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We reformed and strengthened the powers available to local areas to tackle antisocial behaviour, including vandalism, through the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. 6 powers are available to the police, local councils and other agencies, which include the civil injunction and public space protection orders, setting out how a public space can be used.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Over the Christmas period, the Atwood Memorial Hall in my constituency was vandalised. The Community Centre and War Memorial was damaged, and possessions stolen include a wheelchair which was used by the Atwood Stroke Club. This is a truly sickening crime that has caused great distress to our community. What plans does my right honourable friend have to increase the sentences to those found guilty of such offences?
Well, I'm sure the whole House is very sorry to hear about that appalling incident, and I fully understand the distress it must have caused to my honourable friend's constituents. Everyone has the right to feel safe in their local community. We have robust legislation in place to tackle these crimes, from the antisocial behaviour powers in the 2014 Act to criminal damage offences and indeed violent offences if those are appropriate on the facts of the case.
Stephanie Peacock.
Speaker, residents and businesses in Hoyland have recently been subjected to a distressing wave of serious crime, including vandalism, break-ins and theft, which reflects the near 600 fewer South Yorkshire police officers on our streets as a result of this government's cuts. Can the Minister confirm that Barnsley will not get a penny from this government in this year's funding settlement to recruit more frontline officers, and will they think again?
Well, I'm very sorry to hear about the experiences in her constituency, and I hope, therefore, she will be supporting the government's funding settlement that is coming towards us, that will help give up to £970 million more into policing with the help of police and crime commissioners.
Question number 18, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister Wallace.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Tackling serious crime online is one of our highest priorities. We are increasing our investment in law enforcement and will set out plans to legislate in the online harms white paper jointly led by the Home Office and DCMS. It will set clear responsibilities for tech companies to keep UK citizens safe online, including protection from serious online crime.
Lamont. Thank the Minister for that response. Now, technology is the root of a great deal of serious crime in the United Kingdom. I know the Minister understands that and will want to work with tech firms to fight against crime committed online. However, does he rule out the suggestion made by some people, including Sir Timothy John Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, that if significant change isn't forthcoming from the tech firms, we should regulate them?
Sir Tim Berners-Lee is ultimately right in the sense that, yes, if CSBs fail to respond to abuse of the internet, they will need to see an increase in existing regulation. We're considering the full range of possible solutions to address the issue, including a regulatory framework, as well as broader legal and regulatory changes where necessary.
Smith.
Number 19, sir.
Minister Atkins.
We launched the serious violence strategy last year, which has culminated in detailed work stretching across government and includes the Offensive Weapons Bill and the Serious Violence Task Force. But in addition, we want to build this resilience for young people into the future, and so we will be launching a £200 million youth endowment fund to intervene with children and young people at risk of serious violence, and we will be consulting shortly on a new duty to underpin the multi-agency approach under the public health approach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for that response. Sussex Police and Crime Commissioner Katie Bourne was successful recently in getting a grant of almost £1 million from the Home Office, and I thank the Department for that, to specifically address serious offences amongst young people. Can I have an assurance that Crawley will continue to remain a focus of such support to combat serious offences?
Very much. May I congratulate the Police and Crime Commissioner, Katie Bourne. It's always a pleasure to work with Ms Bourne. This is one of 29 projects awarded a total of nearly £18 million from the Early Intervention Youth Fund. This project in Crawley helps to engage positively with children under the age of 18 who are at risk of committing serious violence. The project will establish a network of coaches drawing together the various agencies working with those young people, again very much underpinning our approach to tackling serious violence, which is this is a matter that we should all be concerned about and all working together.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Home Office's funded Violence and Vulnerability Unit's 2018's report noted that a reduction in services that offer positive activities for young people, like youth services and school clubs, has left a vacuum in which gangs are moving into. Will the Minister agree with me that supporting vulnerable young people and protecting them from county lines requires a cross-departmental approach with funding to back it, and that's all too often been missing under the austerity agenda?
Very much so, and I'm pleased that the Honourable Lady was able to meet with my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, recently to discuss this. She will know from the serious violence strategy, from the task force, and from our intention to consult shortly on a public health duty. She will know how seriously this government takes our work to tackle serious violence.
The Honourable Gentleman Member for Colchester was focused intently upon his electronic device, and I'm sure he found it thoroughly captivating, but I gently point out to him that he has a question that is not unadjacent to that with which we're dealing now, and he might care to shoehorn his inquiry into the present. Mr. Will Quince.
21, Mr. Speaker.
No, what I mean is... No, yes, Topicals, blurt it out now, man!
Will the Secretary of State join me in welcoming the £664,000 allocated to Essex from the Home Office Early Intervention Youth Fund, and will the Secretary of State keep the situation under review while ensuring Essex Police has the resources required to continue to tackle this issue?
Again, I'm delighted that Essex is one of 29 projects across the country that have received money under the Early Intervention Youth Fund. The fund in Essex, the project in Essex, will help to support their violence and vulnerability project, because as we know, it is often the vulnerability of young people that place them so starkly in the path of those gangsters who want to exploit them.
Dr. Rosanna Allington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After a worrying upward trend in violent crime in Tooting, I held a crime summit which brought together the police, the local authorities and community groups. This kind of joined up multi-sector working is essential in order to tackle violent crime. Can you tell me please what the government is doing to ensure that we work with local groups at the heart of the community to stamp out violent crime?
That the Honourable Lady has taken that approach in her own constituency, and I have to say it's an approach that government is very much leading on. I'm delighted, for example, that the Mayor of London sits on the committee chaired by the Home Secretary, the task force, and our approach to this is, we cannot arrest our way out of this. We want to intervene at an early stage to stop these young people from getting into the clutches of these criminals in the first place.
Topical Questions, Tracy Brabin.
Topical number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the public testing phase of our EU settlement scheme was launched today. It's open to all resident EU citizens with a valid passport, allowing us to further test the scheme ahead of full rollout by April. And Mr. Speaker, we've also announced a significant increase in police funding for the next year, and PCCs are consulting on plans to recruit around 1,200 extra officers, potentially the biggest increase in officer numbers in 10 years. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we published our draft domestic abuse bill to support victims, tackle perpetrators and to improve services.
Well done. Tracy Brabin.
The Home Secretary, like me and many others in North Kirklees, will have been shocked and concerned to hear last week about 55 local arrests in relation to child sex abuse. This vital investigation will put extra strain on the police and local authority, whose resources are already stretched to breaking point. Can the Home Secretary give my constituents a cast-iron guarantee that the police will have the resources they need to protect victims in the long term and short term, and make sure that the perpetrators are brought to justice, something I'm sure the whole House would agree with?
Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right to raise this. There is a huge focus by this government and by local police forces and others such as the NCA on child sexual exploitation and abuse. She's raised this horrific case in Kirklees, and I can give her an assurance that we want to make sure that all the resources that are necessary are available. I think the recent police settlement for this year will certainly help, but also there's more to be done, including with the tech giants and those who groom our children online.
Thank you, Mr. In the High Court judgment in the Koti El Sheikh case, also known as the ISIS Beatles, does he feel that this vindicates his position on this, a position he took in the face of fierce criticism in this House and further afield?
Mr. Speaker, I of course welcome the High Court's judgment, which upholds my decision on all grounds, and I hope that honourable members who at the time claimed that my decision was inconsistent with long-standing government policy take their time to reflect on this decision. With the situation changing on the ground in Syria as we speak, I will do all I can to protect our country and to bring suspected terrorists to justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased that the government have finally announced that they have introduced the draft domestic abuse bill, and it is now will be outlawed to cross-examination of survivors by their perpetrators. However, more scrutiny of the family courts is needed. Will the Minister commit that this bill will include an independent inquiry into the culture, practice and outcomes of the family courts in connection with child contact cases and actually listen to the children?
Well, may I thank the Honourable Lady who, in a great example of a cross-party consensus, which is very much to be welcomed at the moment, it's great to hear that she's welcoming the introduction of this important draft bill. We are going to, it's a draft bill because we're going to have pre-legislative scrutiny of it, and the idea that she has suggested, I'm sure, will be looked at by the Joint Committee.
Investigations by the Independent Office for Police Conduct can take many years, often meaning that officers put their lives on hold, whilst 2/3 of gross misconduct cases are subsequently not proven. Do ministers share my concerns about this, and what can be done to address it?
I certainly share my honourable friend's concern, and there's widespread frustration among our police officers about this. She will share my view that obviously robust investigation of misconduct is important, but what we want the IAOPC to do is focus on the most serious cases and process those investigations.
Gross misconduct.
Standards can drive behaviours which we wouldn't want to see, with people deliberately, with caseworkers deliberately choosing those that are less complex to deliver, and sometimes it has been the case that complex cases have not received the attention they want. We are working incredibly hard within UKVI across the piece of visas and applications for asylum and leave to remain to make sure that we do drive down waiting times. If the Honourable Lady would like to come and see me and discuss the particular cases, I would be delighted to talk to her about them.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Minister may have seen, Oxford University recently suspended grants from telecoms firm Huawei due to security concerns. In the same week, Germany joined the growing number of our allies and intelligence partners blocking the company from their 5G network. Can I ask my honourable friend if Britain will be taking similar action?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is right to raise this. There is a cross-government approach that is looking at safeguarding our telecoms networks. It would be inappropriate for me to mention any particular company by name, but what I can say, I do very much share my honourable friend's concerns, and I believe that we should work with our allies on a coordinated approach.
Paula Sheriff.
Mr. Speaker, further to the question from my honourable friend, the member for Batley and Spen, last week we saw a further 55 arrests regarding historic and horrific child sexual offences in Kirklees. I have to press the Secretary of State. Exactly when are we going to see the extra resources put into Kirklees so that these offences and others can be fully investigated and the victims of crime can have the necessary protection and support?
Secretary.
I do want to make sure police forces across the country, including West Yorkshire, have the resources they need to deal with this priority. I'm sure the Honourable Lady will welcome the draft police settlement, which is almost an additional, I think, 30 million for her local force, which I know will go to help with this absolute priority.
Speaker, the percentage of convictions secured for domestic abuse is the highest since 2010. What more can the department do in order to ensure that we get more prosecutions and thereby more convictions?
Mr. Speaker, I've listened carefully to what my honourable friend has said. I think that the resources and the settlement that has been announced, the additional almost £1 billion for police forces in England and Wales will certainly help. But there is also more that can be done in terms of making sure police have the powers that they need.
Liz Twist.
Speaker, last November, Tyne and Weir MPs joined together in Westminster Hall to raise the funding problem of Tyne and Weir Fire and Rescue Service, and the Minister undertook to meet the Chief Fire Officer. Can the Minister update us on progress in resolving those problems? Thank you.
Well, can I thank the Honourable Lady and the House for that welcome. Having recently met with the leadership of Tyne, we're excellently led force that is going to be receiving increase in core spending of 1.5% this year. But my undertaking to her, as I did to all fire chiefs today, is to want to work with them to build the evidence base, to put in a credible bid in the next CSR to make sure that our fire service continue to be well resourced and world class.
Anna Soubry.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the domestic violence bill really is an outstanding piece of legislation, and I'm pleased to be getting a warm welcome from both sides of the House. I'm hearing anecdotal evidence, however, that the East Midlands Ambulance Service and indeed Nottinghamshire Police aren't properly using the existing laws. If that turns into hard evidence, would the Minister agree to meet so that we can see what progress we can make?
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend for raising this, and may I pay tribute, please, to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for whom this bill and helping victims of domestic abuse is a personal priority. I would be delighted to meet my right honourable friend, not least because we share the same ambulance service, and I would like them to be doing right by victims of domestic abuse as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has cut 21,000 police officers, which is the cause of violent crime doubling. Knife crime and antisocial behaviour has brought misery and terror into our communities. Isn't it time the Home Secretary got a grip on law and order and invested in our police service before he's fast becomes known as the Home Secretary for Crime and Disorder?
Yeah, that's right. Well, the Honourable Lady will know there's action required on many fronts to fight the rise in serious violence, and that's why we have our serious violence strategy with over 60 different measures taking place. But she will know when it comes to resources, if that's what she really believes in, the best thing to do is to support the government's police settlement.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too welcome the government's domestic abuse bill and the announcements today, and wonder if the Minister could meet with me to discuss issues of continuing emotional abuse once a couple have divorced but share parenting of their children. Constituents of mine in that situation have got some very practical suggestions to reduce that emotional bullying.
Very much so. The bill is just part of our response to tackling domestic abuse. There's a range of non-legislative measures as well, and in making sure that we include emotional abuse in the definition of domestic abuse will help victims of this terrible crime. I'll be delighted to meet with her.
Jimmy Stone.
Mr. Speaker, in the remotest parts of the United Kingdom, EU health workers are filling vital roles that might otherwise remain unfilled. Will the government give me an assurance that these crucial people will be allowed to remain at no cost to themselves?
Well, the honourable gentleman will know that in the second private beta testing phase of the EU Settled Status Scheme, we made a particular priority of those working within NHS trusts and the university sector. He is absolutely right to point out the vital role that EU citizens play within our health service, and he will of course heard the Home Secretary and I repeatedly say we want them to stay and are determined to make it as easy as possible for them to do so.
Mr. Speaker, people in Corby and East Northamptonshire want to see more police out on the beat catching criminals and deterring crime. What difference does my right honourable friend believe the additional funding recently announced will have in achieving that objective?
What we're proposing is the biggest increase in police funding since 2010. Almost every single force in the country is now actively recruiting and delivering what the public want to see, which is more officers on the street, more investigators bearing down on crime.
Mr. Speaker, the national newspaper this morning reports of a female constituent who is detained and is due to be removed tomorrow, despite court papers being lodged at the Court of Session at the start of the month. Is this the hostile environment in action? And either way, will the Minister meet me urgently so we can secure the immediate release of this constituent?
I'm of course very happy to meet the honourable gentleman to discuss this case. He will be conscious that it's inappropriate for me to discuss it on the floor of the House, but I'll meet him privately immediately after.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the coming months, fruit farmers in my constituency plan to welcome thousands of migrant workers from the European Union. Could my honourable friend assure me that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, these workers will still be able to come to make sure that we can pick and pack our fruit?
Well, my honourable friend will be aware that in addition to the rights of EU citizens, which we have secured, we're also piloting a seasonal agricultural worker scheme for those in the soft fruit industry and the growing industries, which she has spoken to me about a number of times, but I'm absolutely happy to give the reassurance that that pilot is something that we wish to see successful and will work with her growers to make sure that it is.
James Frith.
Speaker, Mrs. Amodio and her husband came to live in Bury over 60 years ago. Mrs. Amodio had to sign the Official Secrets Act when she worked at Bury Police Station. Now retired, she and her husband are told by this government to register, apply and pay for settlement status. She feels unwelcome and angry. Can the Minister confirm this policy, and what has she to say to them? Does she agree with me that we become lesser versions of ourselves as a country with such mean-spirited policy?
Mr. Speaker, this government has made it absolutely clear that we welcome all EU citizens that have made their homes here, that have contributed so much to our nation, and we want to have a scheme in place that shows that welcome, and we will reflect on what's being said and see how we can continue to improve the scheme.
Order. Statement. The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that the whole House will join me in condemning Saturday's car bomb attack in Londonderry and paying tribute to the bravery of the Northern Ireland Police and the local community who helped to ensure that everyone got to safety. This House stands together with the people of Northern Ireland in ensuring that we never go back to the violence and terror of the past. Mr. Speaker, turning to Brexit, following last week's vote, it is clear that the government's approach had to change, and it has. Having established the confidence of Parliament in this government, I've listened to colleagues across Parliament from different parties and with different views. Last week I met the leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Westminster leaders of the DUP, SNP, Plaid Cymru and the Green Party, and backbench members from both sides of this House. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, also had a number of such meetings. The government has approached these meetings in a constructive spirit, without preconditions, and I'm pleased that everyone we met with took the same approach. I regret that the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, has not chosen to take part so far. I hope he will reflect on that decision. Given the importance of this issue, we should all be prepared to work together to find a way forward, and my ministerial colleagues and I will continue with further meetings this week. Let me set out the 6 key issues which have been at the centre of the talks to date. The first 2 relate to the process for moving forwards. First, there is widespread concern about the possibility of the UK leaving without a deal. And there are those on both sides of the House who want the government to rule this out. But we need to be honest with the British people about what that means. The right way to rule out no deal is for this House to approve a deal with the European Union. That is what this government is seeking to achieve. The only other guaranteed way to avoid a no-deal Brexit is to revoke Article 50, which would mean staying in the EU. There are others who think that what we need is more time, so they say we should extend Article 50 to give longer for Parliament to debate how we should leave and what a deal should look like. This is not ruling out no deal, but simply deferring the point of decision. And the EU are very unlikely simply to agree to extend Article 50 without a plan for how we are going to approve a deal. So when people say rule out no deal, the consequences of what they are actually saying are that if we in Parliament can't approve a deal, we should revoke Article 50. Mr. Speaker, I believe this would go against the referendum result. And I do not believe that is a course of action that we should take or which this House should support. Second, all the opposition parties that have engaged so far, and some backbenchers, have expressed their support for a second referendum. I've set out many times my deep concerns about returning to the British people for a second referendum. Our duty is to implement the decision of the first one. I fear a second referendum would set a difficult precedent that could have significant implications for how we handle referendums in this country, not least strengthening the hand of those campaigning to break up our United Kingdom. It would require an extension of Article 50. It would require an extension of Article 50. We would very likely have to return a new set of MEPs to the European Parliament in May. And I also believe that there has not yet been enough recognition of the way that a second referendum could damage social cohesion by undermining faith in our democracy. Mr. Speaker, we do not know what the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, thinks about this because he has not engaged. But I know there are members who have already indicated that they wish to test the support of the House for this path. I do not believe there is a majority for a second referendum. And if I am right, then just as the government is having to think again about its approach going forwards, then so too do those members who believe this is the answer. The remaining issues raised in the discussions relate to the substance of the deal, and on these points I believe we can make progress. Members of this House, predominantly but not only on the government benches and the DUP, continue to express their concern on the issue of the Northern Ireland backstop. All of us agree that as we leave the European Union, we must fully respect the Belfast Agreement and not allow the creation of a hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, nor indeed a border down the Irish Sea. And I want to be absolutely clear, in the light of media stories this morning, this government will not reopen the Belfast Agreement. I have never even considered doing so, and neither would I. With regard to the backstop, despite the changes we have previously agreed, there remain two core issues: the fear that we could be trapped in it permanently, and concerns over its potential impact on our union if Northern Ireland is treated differently from the rest of the UK. So I will be talking further this week to colleagues, including in the DUP, to consider how we might meet our obligations to the people of Northern Ireland and Ireland in a way that can command the greatest possible support in the House. And I will then take the conclusions of those discussions back to the EU. From other parts of this House, concerns have also been raised over the political declaration. In particular, these have focused on a wish for further precision around the future relationship. The political declaration will provide the basis for developing our detailed negotiating mandate for the future, and this new phase of negotiations will be different in a number of ways. It will cover a far broader range of issues in greater depth, and so will require us to build a negotiating team that draws on the widest expertise available, from trade negotiators to security experts and specialists in data and financial services. And as we develop our mandate across each of these areas, I want to provide reassurance to the House. Given the breadth of the negotiations, we will seek input from a wide range of voices from outside government. That must include ensuring Parliament has a proper say and fuller involvement in these decisions. It is government's responsibility to negotiate, but it is also my responsibility to listen to the legitimate concerns of colleagues, both those who voted leave and who voted remain, in shaping our negotiating mandate for our future partnership with the EU. So the government will consult this House on its negotiating mandate to ensure that members have the chance to make their views known and that we harness the knowledge of all select committees across the full range of expertise needed for this next phase of negotiations, from security to trade. This will also strengthen the government's hand in the negotiations, giving the EU confidence about our position and avoiding leaving the bulk of parliamentary debate to a point when we're under huge time pressure to ratify. Now, I know that to date Parliament has not felt it has enough visibility of the government's position as it has been developed and negotiated. It has sought documents through humble addresses, but that mechanism cannot take into account the fact that some information, when made public, could weaken the UK's negotiating hand. So as the negotiations progress, we will also look to deliver confidential committee sessions that can ensure Parliament has the most up-to-date information whilst not undermining the negotiations. And we will regularly update the House, in particular before the 6 monthly review points with the EU foreseen in the agreement. While it will always be for Her Majesty's government to negotiate for the whole of the UK, we are also committed to giving the devolved administrations an enhanced role in the next phase, respecting their competence and vital interests in these negotiations. I hope to meet both First Ministers in the course of this week and will use the opportunity to discuss this further with them. And we will also look for further ways to engage elected representatives from Northern Ireland and regional representatives in England. And finally, we will reach out beyond this House and engage more deeply with businesses, civil society and trade unions. Fifth, honourable members from across the House have raised strong views that our exit from the EU should not lead to a reduction in our social and environmental standards, and in particular workers' rights. So I will ensure that we provide Parliament with a guarantee that not only will we not erode protection for workers' rights and the environment, but we will ensure this country leads the way. To that end, my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary, indicated the government's support for the proposed amendment to the meaningful vote put down by the honourable member for Bassett-Law, including that Parliament should be able to consider any changes made by the EU in these areas in future. My right honourable friend and others will work with members across the House, businesses and trade unions to develop proposals that give effect to this amendment, including looking at legislation where necessary. Sixth, and crucially, a number of members have made powerful representations about the anxieties facing EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU who are waiting to have their status confirmed. We have already committed to ensuring that EU citizens in the UK will be able to stay and to continue to access in-country benefits and services on broadly the same terms as now in both a deal and a no-deal scenario. Indeed, the next phase of testing of the scheme for EU nationals to confirm their status has launched today. And having listened to concerns from members and organisations like the 3 Million Group, I can confirm today that when we roll out the scheme in full on the 30th of March, the government will waive the application fee so that there is no financial barrier. So there is no financial barrier for any EU nationals who wish to stay. And anyone who has or will apply during the pilot phase will have their fee reimbursed, and more details about how this will work will be made available in due course. Some EU member states have similarly guaranteed the rights of British nationals in a no-deal scenario, and we will step up our efforts to ensure that they all do so. Mr. Speaker, let me briefly set out the process for the days ahead. In addition to this statement, today I will lay a written ministerial statement as required under Section 13(4) and 5 of the EU Withdrawal Act, and table a motion in neutral terms on this statement as required by Section 13(6). This motion will be amendable and will be debated and voted on in this House on the 29th of January, and I will provide a further update to the House during that debate. To be clear, this is not a rerun of the vote to ratify the agreement we have reached with the European Union, but the fulfilment of the process following the House's decision to reject that motion. The process of engagement is ongoing. In the next few days, my ministerial colleagues and I will continue to meet with members on all sides of the House and with representatives of the trade unions, business groups, civil society and others as we try to find the broadest possible consensus on a way forward. Whilst I will disappoint those colleagues that hope to secure a second referendum, I do not believe that there is a majority in this House for such a path. And whilst I want to deliver a deal with the EU, I cannot support the only other way in which to take no deal off the table, which is to revoke Article 50. So my focus continues to be on what is needed to secure the support of this House in favour of a Brexit deal with the EU. And my sense so far is that the three key changes are needed. First, we will be more flexible, open and inclusive in the future in how we engage Parliament in our approach to negotiating our future partnership with the European Union. Second, we will embed the strongest possible protections on workers' rights and the environment. And third, we will work to identify how we can ensure that our commitment to no hard border in Northern Ireland and Ireland can be delivered in a way that commands the support of this House and the European Union. In doing so, we will honour the mandate of the British people and leave the European Union in a way which benefits every part of our United Kingdom and every citizen of our country. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for an advanced copy of her statement, and I join with her in condemning the car bomb attack we've seen in Londonderry at the weekend, and commend the emergency services and the local community for their response. Mr. Speaker, the huge achievement of the Good Friday Agreement in reducing violence in Northern Ireland must never be taken for granted. It was an historic step forward, but we cannot take it for granted. The government still appears not to have come to terms with the scale of the defeat in the House of Commons last week. The Prime Minister seems to be going through the motions of accepting the result, but in reality is in deep denial. The logic of that decisive defeat is that the Prime Minister must change her red lines because her current deal is undeliverable. So can she be clear and explicit with the House? Which of her red lines is she prepared to move on? The Prime Minister's invitation to talks have been exposed as a PR sham. Every opposition party politician came out of those meetings with the same response. Contrary to what the Prime Minister has just said, there was no flexibility, there were no negotiations, nothing has changed.
Order. The Prime Minister was heard, and when there was noise, I called for it to stop, and the same must apply to the Leader of the Opposition. No one in this chamber will shout the Right Honourable Gentleman down. Don't even bother trying, you're wasting your breath. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But I do welcome the commitment that the fee for EU citizens to apply for settled status will be waived. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister was fond of saying that this is the best possible deal on the table. It is the only possible deal on the table. But our EU negotiating partners are clear, and I quote, "Unanimously, the European Council have always said that if the UK chooses to shift its red lines in the future to go beyond a simple free trade agreement, then the EU will be immediately ready to give a favourable response." The House voted to hold the referendum. It also voted to trigger Article 50. There is a clear majority of this House to support a deal in principle and to respect the referendum result. But it requires the Prime Minister to face reality and accept her deal has been comprehensively defeated. Instead, we now understand the Prime Minister is going back to Europe to seek concessions on the backstop. Can I ask the Prime Minister this? What is the difference between legal assurances and concessions? What makes her think that what she tried to renegotiate in December will succeed in January? Mr. Speaker, this really does feel a bit like Groundhog Day. So, the first thing she must do is recognise the clear majority in this House against leaving without a deal and rule out no deal and stop the colossal waste of public money planning for an outcome. Questions too must be asked of the Chancellor. He reassured businesses that no deal would be ruled out by the Commons. Yet, he is sanctioning £4.2 billion to be spent on an option he believes will be ruled out. The Foreign Secretary said last week it was very unrealistic to believe the House of Commons would not find a way to block no deal. Mr. Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister to meet first with her Chancellor and her Foreign Secretary and see if they can convince her to do what is in her power to rule out no deal? And if she will not do that now, will she confirm to the House that if an amendment passes that rules out no deal, she will implement that instruction? The Prime Minister agreed the backstop because of her pledge to the people of Northern Ireland to avoid a hard border. But no deal would mean a hard border in Ireland and break the Prime Minister's commitment. Is she seriously willing to accept a hard border? But today heralds the start of a democratic process where this House will debate amendments that will determine how we navigate Brexit. Of course the government tried to block us ever getting to this stage. They wanted us to have no democratic scrutiny whatsoever. Labour set out, and I believe there may be a majority in the House, for such a proposal for a new comprehensive customs union with the EU that would include a say, a strong single market deal that delivers frictionless trade, and ensure no race to the bottom on workers' rights or indeed any other of the important regulations and protections we have. We will, as we've said consistently from the beginning, back amendments that seek to rule out the disaster of no deal. And, as we've said, will not rule out the option of a public vote. So, Mr. Speaker, no more phony talks. Parliament will debate and decide. And this time, Mr. Speaker, I hope and expect the government to listen to this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I just say to the right honourable gentleman, he says no more phony talks. It would be nice just to have some talks with him on this issue. Because he makes lots of claims about what has been said in the talks that have been held so far, but actually he doesn't know, because he didn't turn up to those talks. And I come back to him, he makes a great deal about the issue of no deal. He said that there is a consensus. I think he said there was a view across this House that supported a deal in principle and wanted to deliver on Brexit. That's exactly what I want to sit down and talk to him about. Because what we need to see is what is it that will secure the support of this House to enable us to leave the European Union with a deal. And we are continuing to listen to groups across the House in order to find the way to secure that support. Now, he talks about ruling out no deal. As I said in my statement, there are only two ways that you can ensure that no deal does not happen. One is to revoke Article 50, to reverse the decision of the referendum and to stay in the European Union. That would be a betrayal of the referendum decision that was taking place in 2016. And the other way is to agree a deal with the European Union. And it is precisely about finding a way that we can secure the support of this House for a deal that I'm talking with members across the House about and want to talk with the right honourable gentleman about. So I hope, from what he said today, that he will reconsider his decision not to attend those talks. He asked me to. He complained about the amount of money that was being spent. He talked about £4.2 billion being spent and how that money should actually be spent in other ways. I see the Labour Party have put out a press release saying that money should be spent in other ways. What the right honourable gentleman might not have noticed is that actually that £4.2 billion is not all money that's being spent on no deal. If we stop spending that money, then we wouldn't be prepared for a deal either. So he needs to recognise that actually government has to spend money to ensure that we are in a position, whatever the outcome of the negotiations with the European Union, whether we leave with a deal or in a no-deal circumstance. So I say once again to the right honourable gentleman and across the House, for those who are concerned about no deal, that means we should be leaving with a deal. But what we need to find is the way that this House we can secure the support of this House for a deal. What has been clear from the discussions that we have had so far is the wide variety of views that are held around this House on this issue. But when it comes to it, we all need to be able to look our constituents in the eye and say that we did the right thing by them. That is leaving with a deal that we ensures we deliver on the referendum and protect their jobs. That is what the government is about, that is what we're working on, and that is what we will deliver.
Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Mr. Speaker, as a supporter of the withdrawal agreement last week, I welcome the Prime Minister's acceptance of the need for change in the light of the result, and also her reassurance that she will not compromise on a permanently open border in Northern Ireland, and that, therefore, any discussions she has with the hard right wing on the Irish backstop will not compromise the commitment to a permanently open border. But would she also consider reaching out to those Remainers here who are not yet convinced of her agreement by at least relaxing, if she can't do a U-turn, her normal rejection of a customs union, because I don't see those agreements with outside powers lining up to do trade agreements with us to compensate us for leaving Europe, and her resistance to regulatory alignment with Europe, which is not inconsistent with some tightening up, at least, of freedom of movement of labour. I do urge her to be flexible on every front, because there was a large majority against the proposal last week, and there are probably more numerous Remainers who voted against her than there are Brexiteers, and she needs to reach out to them.
I'd say to my right honourable and learned friend, he talks about some degree of regulatory alignment. He might not have noticed that last summer the government put forward a proposal which included a degree of regulatory alignment with a parliamentary lock on that regulatory alignment, which raised concerns among a number of members of this House, and which members of this House said that some said that they would not consider to be the proper way forward. I actually think that what we need to have in the future is a good trade relationship with the European Union. What we have in the political declaration is a recognition that that issue of regulatory alignment with standards that are followed by the European Union is in balance with the question of checks at the border, and there is a spectrum of where that balance results. I've argued for frictionless trade. There are those in the European Union who have not accepted the concept of frictionless trade, but who do accept the concept of reducing that frictions at the border to as far as possible. And my right honourable and learned friend also said that he didn't see the trade deals that might come from around the rest of the world. I might say to him, I had today I had lunch with the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and one of the topics we were discussing was precisely a future trade deal between the United Kingdom and New Zealand, and before members opposite start talking about the size of New Zealand, not just a trade deal with New Zealand, but actually membership of the United Kingdom in the CPTPP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for advance copy of her statement. All of us share with the Prime Minister an abhorrence and disgust at the bombing that took place in Derry over the weekend, and we're delighted at the efforts of the emergency services that made sure there was no loss of life. But, Mr. Speaker, in the light of that, it was disturbing to see media reports this morning, at least of the potential of the opening up of the Good Friday Agreement. Now, I welcome the comments from the Prime Minister this afternoon, but can she confirm that she will neither seek to amend or add to the Good Friday Agreement in any way? Many of us remember the dark days that Northern Ireland went through. This weekend's attack was a frightening reminder of the fragility of the peace in Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, on the subject of talks, the SNP entered willingly into talks with the Prime Minister last week, and we remain ready to engage in those talks on the basis that we can discuss pausing Article 50, taking no deal off the table, and discussing a people's vote. But when the Prime Minister talks about no preconditions, in the letters which have gone back and forward between the two of us, the Prime Minister insists that the United Kingdom must leave the European Union on the 29th of March. Mr. Speaker, that is not consistent with a desire to discuss a people's vote. All preconditions must be taken off the table if we are to engage in meaningful dialogue. The SNP know that the Prime Minister's strategy is now to run down the clock, and I would have to say there is no sign that she is interested in meaningful talks or meaningful change. Prime Minister, take no deal off the table. You tell me that you have no desire for no deal. The Foreign Secretary has no desire for no deal. The Chancellor has no desire for a no deal. The Leader of the Opposition has no desire for no deal. The SNP has no desire for no deal. Neither do the Liberal Democrats, Plaid Cymru or the Greens. So let's stop this charade, because if we were to have a people's vote, we would have to extend Article 50. To say that today the only option is to revoke it is not true, although in our case we would welcome that in any case. Mr. Speaker, on the basis of the result last week of a defeat of 230 votes, the Prime Minister has not come here with fundamental change. This government is a farce. It's an embarrassment, and the leadership is shambolic. The Prime Minister now must step up. We must extend Article 50 and end this impasse by bringing forward a second EU referendum. Do it for all sorts of reasons, but do it for the EU citizens living in the UK and now facing a registration scheme. Now, I am grateful and I congratulate the Prime Minister that the fees have been waived for EU nationals, a campaign that's been led by the Scottish National Party and our government in Edinburgh. It is shameful that those here, many have been here for decades, are being forced to register to stay in their own home. That is the fundamentals of it. Mr. Speaker, not in our name, where is the humanity of this? Mr. Speaker, in Scotland we have another choice. We did not vote for Brexit. We will not be dragged out of Europe by a Tory government we did not vote for. We might not be able to save the UK, but we can save Scotland. We have an escape route from the chaos of Brexit, an independent Scotland. Scottish independence will result in our country being a destination in Europe, a country at the heart of Europe, while the rest of the UK turns inwards and isolated from its European neighbours. Mr. Speaker, we want no part of it.
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he raised a number of issues there. He talked about the issue of the Belfast Agreement. As I said in my statement, this government will not reopen the Belfast Agreement. I've never considered doing that, and I would not do it. So we remain committed to the Belfast Agreement and to maintaining our commitments under the Belfast Agreement. He talked about the question of no deal. He talked about running down the clock. We're not running down the clock. I brought a deal that had been negotiated with the European Union to the House. The House has rejected that. The House has rejected that. But I say once again to the right honourable gentleman, as I did earlier to the Leader of the Opposition and to other members of this House, and it's very simple. You cannot wish away no deal. Either you stay in the European Union or you have a deal. Now, I believe that it is right for us to leave the European Union because that's what people voted for in the referendum in 2016. So if you don't want no deal, if somebody doesn't want no deal, they have to be willing to agree a deal. And the point about sitting down and talking with people across this House is to identify those issues on which it will be possible for us to secure support, to make changes such that we can secure the support around this House. I thank him for his comments about the announcement that we've made today in terms of the fees for the applications for Citizens' Right. I would commend my honourable friends and members for South Leicestershire, Bexhill and Battle, Chesham and Ayrshire. But also, this was an issue that was raised by other members across this House. And then finally, I will say to the right honourable gentleman, as I have said before and will continue to say, that for the Scottish National Party to stand up and say that the best economic future for Scotland is to be outside the United Kingdom, is to fly... well, I have to say to every one of those members who is cheering that thought, that is to fly in the face of economic reality, because the reality is...
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder whether the Prime Minister and indeed the Leader of the Opposition recognise that with just 2 months to go, the past week has shown that party politics and Westminster will not deliver a resolution on Brexit, because party politics is not the same as Brexit. Brexit is separate to party politics, and so that will not change, and this House will not find a route forward. And she talks about social cohesion, but surely the most divisive thing to do would be for members of this House to vote through her deal, knowing that our communities simply do not want it. And isn't it time for all of us to be honest that Parliament's run out of road? We've been debating for 2.5 years. We could debate for another 2.5 years, and we still wouldn't reach a resolution on Brexit. The only people who can do that now, surely, are the British people.
I say to my right honourable friend, and I recognise the passion with which she is campaigning on this particular issue, but she is assuming that it is not possible to reach an agreement which will secure the support of the House. The purpose of what we are doing at the moment, of talking with parties, of talking with backbenchers across this House, is to find those issues. I've indicated issues in my statement on which we can move, and on which we can then find that support across the House. I believe it is right for us to continue to work for a deal, to leave the European Union on the 29th of March, to do so with a deal that has secured the support of this House.
Ed Miliband.
Speaker, can I ask the Prime Minister, as a litmus test of her flexibility, if this House voted, for example, for membership of a customs union, would she implement that decision?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that, of course, the point about what we're doing in terms of this process is identifying those issues on which there is agreement across this House and that secure the support of the House, of dealing with that with the European Union, but also of being faithful to the referendum and the vote that was cast in the referendum. And I believe that everybody, when we look at this issue, should not only say, should we be leaving the European Union, but should recognise the reasons that lay behind the vote to leave the European Union and deliver on those.
Mr. Ian Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, particularly the part where she said that the EU nationals would have their fee waived. I think the whole House should recognise that, and also her acceptance that there is to be no change to the Belfast Agreement, for that would have opened a can of worms, and I recognise that completely. But she's also made clear, as someone who did not support the agreement last week, that she will now go forward and seek further change, and I welcome that. But in doing that, I wonder whether she has given further thought that, given that although she remains absolutely, completely in overall charge, whether she would insert a senior politician in those day-to-day negotiations to ensure that the political ramifications of this are taken carefully into consideration.
Can I say to my right honourable friend, these negotiations at this stage are for politicians. Indeed, I will continue to have a role in that. The Secretary of State will have a role in that as well as we go forward. But what we need to ascertain first is where we can ensure that we can secure the support of this House for a deal, and then take that forward to the European Union.
Vincent Cable.
Could I also welcome the fee waiver, and also welcome the Prime Minister's willingness to engage in serious conversation, including about the merits and the practicalities of a people's vote. But can I ask a specific question? At the end of last week, the Secretary of State for Defence put 3,500 troops on Brexit standby. Could she clarify what their rules of engagement would be in the event that they faced angry and violent demonstrators, and would they be armed?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that it is of course right that the government is taking the necessary contingency arrangements for the situation. I think what he will find is what we're talking about is those troops perhaps being able to relieve others who are undertaking roles such as guarding of certain sites. That's what we're talking about.
Sir William Cash.
Mr. Speaker. On the vital issue of UK tax policy, will my right honourable friend also reconsider the provisions under which the United Kingdom will embrace EU state aid rules, with the European Commission actually supervising our Competition and Markets Authority, and which gives the Commission a veto over future tax incentives for investment developments such as free ports, airports, industrial and enterprise zones?
Say to my honourable friend that if he looks back on the discussions that have taken place in the European Union, he will see that it has often been the United Kingdom that has been promoting fair competition across the United Kingdom, including in relation to state aid rules. The question of those state aid rules and what will be included in any future trade agreement that we have with the European Union is, of course, a matter that will be looked at in detail in the next stage of negotiations.
Yvette Cooper.
The Prime Minister seems to be talking as if she lost by 30 votes, not 230 votes. She says now she wants to give Parliament a say on the political declaration and the future partnership, but to be honest, we've heard all of this before. If she's serious, why not give Parliament a say before we finish the Article 50 negotiations, not after? Why not put to Parliament some votes on her red lines, including a customs union? Otherwise, how can any of us believe a word she says?
As I've set out, the correct process, which is provided for under the legislation, is that there will be a neutral motion next week, which will be amendable. There will be members across this House who wish to put down motions which may reflect different views across the House in relation to different matters. We will, of course, continue to work. And when the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, said that we were denying any democratic involvement in the process of, well, he says from a sedentary position, yes, we were. Actually, no, there is still, even when we get the support of this House for a deal, there will still be the process of legislating to ensure that that deal is put in place, and the role that this House will play in that legislation.
Boris Johnson.
Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on her decision to waive the registration fee for EU nationals? I think will be very welcome, and also on her determination now to go back to Brussels and fix the backstop, because I think that is the way forward. But can she confirm that in so doing she will now seek legally binding change to the text of that backstop and to the text of the withdrawal agreement itself?
Say to my right honourable friend, what we are doing is exploring with members across this House the nature of any movement on the backstop that would secure the support of this House. There are a number of options that have been raised with us by members across the House. We need to look at those and continue to talk with colleagues, both those who have raised it from the backbenches on this side of the House and those who have raised this issue with from the benches opposite, particularly, obviously, our confidence and supply partners. There are a number of options. We will look to see what is going to secure the support of the House.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I join with the Prime Minister in her words about the despicable and reckless attack in Londonderry at the weekend, carried out by Republican terrorists, of course, who are responsible for the murders of prison officers David Black in 2012 and Adrian Ismay in March 2016. These people have nothing to offer anyone in Northern Ireland and are rejected right across the board. On Brexit, can I thank the Prime Minister for the meetings that we have had in recent days and the good engagement, and for her recognition that there are core issues that need to be sorted out as far as the withdrawal agreement is concerned, her willingness to try and reach a consensus, and the fact that she is going to go back to Brussels and ask for the necessary changes to be made. And can I take it from what the Prime Minister has said that she is really serious now in terms of getting a consensus that can get this through the House with the necessary legal changes to the withdrawal agreement?
Yes, I can give the right honourable gentleman the assurance that obviously what I want to do is to identify the way forward in relation to dealing with the issues that have been raised about the backstop. I referenced the two key issues on its potential permanency and the impact on the Union in my statement, and find the best way, the way that we can resolve those issues that will command support from this House.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I take this opportunity to warmly thank the Prime Minister for having listened to the concerns that I and other members have raised on the issue of EU nationals? And can I ask her, given the goodwill that she's shown on this issue, can she please remind the EU of their promises to reciprocate and encourage the EU 27 to remove any fees that they charge to UK citizens in their member states?
I think my honourable friend has raised a very important point. While it's important for us to give that reassurance to EU citizens here, we must also remember the UK citizens living in the EU 27 member states, and we will be pressing them to give the reciprocal commitments to UK citizens living in those member states. There are a number of states that have already said that they committed to various ways that they will provide protection for rights in a no-deal situation. We will continue to press them all to reciprocate.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Speaker, last Wednesday the Prime Minister said to the House that she would reach out in order to try and find a way forward from the crisis that is facing our country. But I'm sorry to say that, having listened to her statement this afternoon, while her door may have been open, her mind has remained closed because she has rejected stopping us leaving the EU with no deal, even though she knows it would be disastrous, and she has rejected remaining in a customs union, even though she knows it is an essential contribution to keeping an open border and maintaining friction-free trade. The Brexit Select Committee last Wednesday published a report identifying a number of alternative ways forward and recommended that they be put to the House in a series of indicative votes. Since the Prime Minister has twice this afternoon said, well, what is it that will secure the support of the House, will she now put those to the vote?
The right honourable gentleman knows that the government will be tabling a neutral motion next Tuesday. That is what is required under the legislation, and that will now be, and that is an amendable motion. But the right honourable gentleman again referenced this issue of rejecting no deal. As I said earlier, if people don't want no deal, there are only two ways to go, and it's no good honourable members from a sedentary position chuntering or shouting about this issue. The sheer facts are that no deal will only be taken off the table by either revoking Article 50, which turns back the result of the referendum, the government will not do that, or by having a deal, and that's what we're trying to work out.
Andrea Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, today the Shadow International Trade Secretary visited my constituency and said to the BBC, I quote, "If there is a motion for a second referendum that is put before Parliament, our position and the party is that we would be supporting a public vote." Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and I'm sure many Brexiteers in the north of England, that a second referendum would be a sellout and cause a huge amount of harm to trust in politicians?
I do agree with my honourable friend, because I believe that a lot of people voted for the first time, or for the first time in many years, in the referendum in 2016. And I think their faith in politicians would be shattered if we failed to deliver on that vote. We have a duty to deliver on that vote in the referendum.
Angela Eagle.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister could reach out by relaxing her own self-imposed red lines, which would include thinking about other solutions, such as staying in a customs union, which would deal with the backstop situation. But she seems intent on only trying to get her dead deal through the House by playing chicken with her own Brexiteers and what she calls her confidence and supply partners. So will she, first of all, tell us that she really does want to reach out, and secondly, will she tell the House, if we do amend this motion next Tuesday, will she respect that decision and put it into effect?
I say to the Honourable Lady that, of course, as I've said, it is possible for people to move amendments to the motion next Tuesday. We wanted to sit down with all parties and with different groups across the House, because there are different opinions on these issues in parties across this House, and find out where it is that it will be possible to secure support for a deal, to take that forward, to ensure that we leave with a deal. But underpinning that, of course, is the importance of us delivering on the referendum. I believe it is a duty for this Parliament to deliver on the referendum, to deliver Brexit, and to deliver a Brexit with a deal.
John Redwood.
A majority of voters in the referendum voted to leave and did not vote to sign a new comprehensive treaty binding us back into features of the EU. But I think a big majority in the country would welcome a comprehensive free trade agreement and use of Article 24 of the GAP while we're negotiating it. So will my right honourable friend, when she goes back to Brussels, table such a comprehensive free trade agreement and see if that breaks the logjam?
I say to my right honourable friend that we have been looking at a free trade area, a free trade agreement with the European Union. I just want to ensure that that is as ambitious as possible, and that's what is set out in the political declaration.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The only thing we know for certain that people voted for in the referendum was to leave the EU. Any other speculation is simply that. So I repeat the question that my right honourable friend, the member for Doncaster North, put earlier. Amazingly, she didn't even mention the words customs union in her statement. But if this House voted to either remain in a customs union or to remain in EFTA or the EEA, all issues that were raised with her by her own MPs when she met them last week, will she adhere to that?
As I've said, obviously it will be for people to amend the motion that takes place next week to see whether there is. What I say to can I just say to the right honourable lady, she is making some assumptions about the views of people across this House, which actually have not been. Which have not been reflected by the discussions that we have had with members across this House.
Sir Hugo Swire.
Friend's absolutely right to reject ruling out a no deal. Can I also say, for those of us like myself who did not support the government's withdrawal agreement on the basis of the backstop, if she can return from Brussels with something which is legally enforceable on this one area, I believe that she will carry most of the House with her.
Well said. Thank my right honourable friend for his comment. It has been clear in the conversations that we have had that in the specifics of the withdrawal agreement it is the backstop that is the issue, and that is why we'll be working hard to find a resolution of it.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
The Prime Minister knows that farming is integral to Welsh heritage. It is the beating heart of our rural economy. But she must also understand this. When she humours the idea of a no-deal Brexit, she freezes the heart's blood of our communities. When I meet with Welsh farmers this week, on what grounds can I possibly assure them that Westminster defends their interests when the Prime Minister would evidently prefer no deal to a people's vote?
I say to the honourable lady that I've given my response to the issue of a people's vote second referendum previously. I was pleased to meet, after we had negotiated the deal with the European Union, I was pleased to meet with Welsh farmers, and they were supporting their deal. They believed that it would be a good deal for Welsh farmers.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
Bearing in mind that the Leader of the Opposition has a reputation for meeting with almost any organisation in the world, my constituents found it very distasteful that he was not prepared to give up his time to meet the Prime Minister. Will my right honourable friend assure the House that actually there have been a number of occasions when the House has given her instructions? The House has given the government an instruction about holding a referendum. The House has given an instruction about the date that we leave the European Union. and the Prime Minister is doing her utmost to carry out those commands.
Can I thank my right honourable friend? I think there are a number of people who are surprised at the Leader of the Opposition's unwillingness to meet with me as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom when he has met with other groups who do not have the national interest of this country at heart. And I am absolutely working to deliver, as my right honourable friend says, on the instructions of this Parliament that we leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
Kate Hoey.
Speaker, can I welcome the Prime Minister ruling out a second referendum and ruling out revoking Article 50 and leaving a WTO, whether managed or not, deal on the table. But could I just say to her, this is a Remain Parliament. The majority of people, MPs in this Parliament, voted to remain. Would she not think that one of the ways that we could show we are honouring what the people said would be to speed up the numbers of statutory instruments that needs to be got through this Parliament, the numbers of legislation that needs to be get through, so that we can actually get out on March the 29th.
Well, can I say to the right honourable lady that we have been obviously laying statutory instruments. Getting statutory instruments through this House, of course, does require the usual channels to work together, and I'm sure that her party front bench, will have heard the interest that she has in ensuring those statutory instruments are able to go through this House.
Dominic Raab.
Welcome the Prime Minister's statement and support her determination to return to Brussels to secure changes, particularly to the backstop. Given what she said in her statement, can I urge my right honourable friend to not just rule out revoking Article 50, but rule out extending it, because that would give businesses certainty and give the public some finality and some reassurance that we will leave at the end of March, as promised.
Can I hope give my right honourable friend the reassurance that what I'm working for is to find a deal that will secure the support of this House such that we can leave and will leave the European Union on the 29th of March.
We're streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is now clear that the Prime Minister is counting on the House of Commons to rule out her red lines because she lacks the political authority to do so. But will she also accept and understand that whether it's her dead deal, no deal, Norway or no Brexit, all of the options that lie ahead are substantially different to what people were promised during the referendum? Given that, does she not understand there is not just a practical desire for a new referendum to break the parliamentary deadlock, but a moral imperative to make sure that it's the people that agree this country's future for generations to come?
Honourable gentleman, I apologise that I didn't have an immediate recall of the fact, but I wish the honourable gentleman a happy birthday, and I observe, probably not for the first time or the last, that he seems to me to be a very youthful fellow. The Prime Minister.
I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, to echo the many happy returns, happy birthday to the honourable gentleman. But can I say to him that I think when people voted in the referendum, they voted to leave the European Union. They voted to ensure that free movement came to an end. I think there were those who voted to ensure that we had an independent trade policy, those who voted to ensure there was no control from the remit of the European Court of Justice here in the United Kingdom, and those who were concerned about the money that was sent every year to the European Union. And it is delivering on those that I think it's important that this Parliament focuses on.
George Freeman.
Speaker, can I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, in particular her commitment to waive the fee required to be paid by European citizens, and her commitment to reach out cross-party in pursuit of a Brexit deal. We have to honour that referendum. Would she agree with me that while the Leader of the Opposition's position on Brexit is crystal clear, he's for leave up north and remain down south, there are many backbench Labour colleagues who have very serious Brexit voting constituencies who are looking for a way to honour the referendum result with us? And would she support those talks in trying to find a moderate, sensible, orderly Brexit that can deliver for the majority of the British people?
Can I thank my honourable friend for pointing out the inconsistencies in the Leader of the Opposition's position on this particular issue? I am working to ensure that we can deliver, that we can find that way through that enables us to leave the European Union, to leave in a smooth and orderly way, to leave with a deal, and to leave with a deal that is good for people across the whole of the United Kingdom.
Frank Field.
The Prime Minister is spending time reaching out to the House of Commons. Might we have a chance to reach out to her? During her statement, she made a number of assertions about what the opinions were of this House, but none of us know what the opinions of this House are or is. Might, therefore, when I table amendment on indicative votes, might the Prime Minister make that government policy so that we can openly and our constituents see how we are voting, not how we are privately lobbying, on what guidance we wish to give to the Prime Minister?
The right honourable gentleman says I made a number of assertions in my statement. I made a number of comments that were based on the discussions that we have had so far with people from across this House, and we will continue to have those discussions. And I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will. As I've indicated earlier, there is a neutral motion that is amendable next week, but the comments I made on the views of people across the House were based on the discussions that we've had. There are further discussions to be had.
Heidi Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to start by thanking the Prime Minister for offering to waive the £65 fee for EU citizens. I have a significant number in my constituency in South Cambridge and the scientific and research communities who will be relieved. However, what they won't be relieved about, and neither will I, well, the fact that now almost a week has gone on since the vote that was so significantly lost in this place, and yet we have no further information today about what the government's position is. Surely we cannot go on for yet another week. That's wasting another 2 weeks in total without some direction. So many members in this House today have suggested customs union, people's vote, indicative votes. The Prime Minister must commit to honouring one of those next week.
To my honourable friend, I set out in the statement that I made the areas on which the issues that had come up during the discussions we've had with members across this House. We will continue to have those discussions, and we are addressing those issues that I identified in my statement.
Joe Swinson.
I cannot believe that in good conscience, knowing what the Prime Minister does about the devastating impact of no deal on our economy and on our security, that she is willing to let us leave the EU on that basis. Yet she seems wedded to her red lines and still against a people's vote, which would have majority support if she backed it. With 67 days to go, the country deserves better than a massive game of chicken in the Tory party. When will the Prime Minister recognise she needs to move?
To the right honourable lady, that she talks about the issue of no deal. It is not good enough simply to say that somebody doesn't want no deal. You could only deliver not having no deal, as I've said, in two ways. Now, there may be members of the Liberal Democrat Party who have a different view from me on whether or not we should stay in the European Union. I believe we should honour the result of the referendum in 2016. But the only other way to ensure that we don't leave with no deal is to leave with a deal. It's pretty simple.
Priti Patel.
I welcome the Prime Minister's recognition of the difficulties that have been raised around the backstop. So when the Prime Minister goes to Brussels, is she prepared to reopen the text of the withdrawal agreement in order to actually address many of the concerns that she has heard from many, many members and right honourable members of the House with regards to the backstop?
My right honourable friend, what we are doing is talking to members across this House to identify the various ways in which it would be possible to address this issue of the backstop. A number of options have been raised with us, and we are looking at all those options that have been raised.
Where's Leslie?
When the Prime Minister says there are only two ways to rule out a no-deal scenario, why does she keep leaving out the option of a people's vote?
Exactly.
It's true that would involve seeking to extend Article 50, but it would be for a very specific reason of the democratic consent of the British people, rather than seeking to extend Article 50 for no specific reason. So on this issue, both for her and for the Labour Party front bench, isn't this now a time for leadership and decision-making and not prevarication and delay?
The decision was made in 2016 by the British people that we should leave the European Union, and that's what we're delivering.
David Jones.
Mr. Speaker, the Irish government has warned of the likely adverse economic and social impact on the Republic of a no-deal Brexit, given the extent of that country's reliance upon the British economy. Since the Irish backstop is probably the greatest impediment to a negotiated Brexit, can my right honourable friend confirm that she maintains bilateral discussions with the Irish government with a view to ascertaining if at all possible we can put forward an agreed position to the European Union?
Good point. We do continue to talk to the Irish government about their position in relation to the backstop. The formal position, of course, is that this issue of customs across the border dealing with the border is an EU competence and therefore not an individual member state competence. But of course, the position that the Irish government takes will be an important element of any consideration that the EU gives to any proposals that we put forward, and we will continue to talk to them.
Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister says that she wants to find a way forward, but without allowing Parliament to vote on different options, it's unclear how we can discover where consensus lies. Isn't the truth that any alternative to the Prime Minister's deal, whether it is a Norway-type model, a Canada-type model, a customs union, or indeed a people's vote, all of them require more time to negotiate or to go back to the country? The Prime Minister says extending Article 50 is just putting off the decision, but the truth is that by failing to build a consensus, the only way that we can leave without a deal, now her deal has been so roundly rejected by this House, is to extend Article 50. And even at this late stage, will the Prime Minister not now agree to do that?
As a honourable lady, that we are continuing to work to see what would secure the support of this House, what deal would secure the support of this House such that we can leave the European Union with a deal. But can I also say to the honourable lady that extending Article 50 is not just the sort of great hope that she has, that this somehow solves everything. It defers the decision point that needs to be taken. There are limitations to what will be possible. This is not a decision for the United Kingdom alone, and the EU would be highly unlikely to agree an extension to Article 50 unless they had the prospect that there was an agreement, that there was a deal that would be delivered. Talks to ensure that we can identify what deal can be delivered is what we're engaging in.
Owen Patterson.
Can I welcome my honourable friend's comments on Northern Ireland? She knows that if we were to follow the route proposed by the honourable member for Wokingham, and we did get to the point where we could trigger Article 24 of GATT, we could continue for up to 10 years on zero tariffs and zero quotas, and that would allay many of the fears of those members opposite who are very worried about high tariffs under so-called world trade terms.
Can I say to my right honourable friend that this question of the GATT 24 is perhaps not quite as simple as some may have understood it to be. I think it is his expectation that it is simply possible to leave with no deal and immediately go into that situation, I think does not actually reflect accurately the situation that the United Kingdom would find ourselves in. I continue to believe that leaving with a deal is the best way forward for us in this leaving the European Union. That's what we'll continue to work for.
Barry Sherman.
Is the Prime Minister aware that this is supposed to be Blue Monday, the most miserable day of the year in the United Kingdom? But on this day, can I offer her some warmth and cheer? Because last week's resounding vote, she showed her resilience and she has been listening to people and talking to people. Can I just urge her to carry that process on? It doesn't, in this Westminster village, happen overnight. Will she persist? Because otherwise I think she will have misread the feeling of this House. We will be demanding a vote on customs union, we will be demanding a vote on lengthening the process, and we will be demanding a vote on the people's choice and people's vote. If she listens more, I think we can come to a conclusion in this House that's going to be good for all of the country and not a miserable one.
Can I give the right honourable gentleman the assurance that we do want to continue those discussions, continue those conversations, continue listening in order to find what I think he, at the end of his question, he was indicating, which is a way forward that can be supported by this House and that will be good for everybody across the country.
Anna Seabury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but this just isn't good enough. This whole process is now turning our country into a laughingstock. The people of this country are worried. and businesses have none of the certainty that they absolutely need in order to flourish. The Prime Minister, when she faced the possibility in December of losing the vote, delayed the vote and said she was going to go over to the EU and sort out the backstop. So we waited and nothing happened, nothing changed. Last week it was a historic defeat. Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, this House has spoken. It has rejected overwhelmingly the Prime Minister's deal. And here we are with another week of can kicking. And the truth is, Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, the truth is, isn't it, nothing's changed.
Take to my right honourable friend. I mean, first of all, we did receive some further assurances from the European Union following the delay of the vote in December. Those assurances proved not to be sufficient for this House. This House rejected the deal, including those assurances. What we are now doing is working with people across this House to find the way forward that will secure a deal so that we can leave the European Union, do it in a smooth and orderly way, and leave with a deal which is in the interests of people across this country.
Sammy Wilson.
Can I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has rejected the demands from the leader of the Labour Party to raise the white flag in these negotiations by moving the date of the 29th of March for his leaving the EU? Is she disappointed that even before she has put forward any plan B, that the Irish Government and the Irish Vice President of the European Parliament have
and for
with the deal, we recognise the commitment.
on the vote last week that she won, namely the vote of confidence. That she would not engage in preparations for a second referendum on the basis that either we negotiate a successful deal which the House of Commons votes for, or we leave on WTO terms. And will she take the advice of JP Morgan, who stood side by side in the referendum for Remain, but are now warning that the extension of Article 50 would, and I quote, be the worst of all possible worlds, death by 1,000 cuts for the British economy? Will she make sure that we avoid that extension?
I say to my right honourable friend, I had not seen that comment from JP Morgan, but as I've been clear that I believe it's important that we deliver on the vote of the referendum, leaving the European Union, and that is on the 29th of March.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us before that a public vote could, and I quote, damage social cohesion by undermining faith in our democracy. Can I tell her it's because of the way she and her government have thus far handled this process over the last 2 years that the public already believe that our politics is broken? Will the Prime Minister today acknowledge that there can be nothing more democratic than the vote that gives the entire country a final say on her deal?
Say to the honourable lady that I think that there are many, many people up and down this country who have a very simple view, that there was a vote that took place in 2016. The result of that was to leave the European Union. And there are many people now, not only those who voted to leave at that time, but many of those who voted to remain at that time, that feel it is now incumbent on government and Parliament to deliver on the result of that vote.
Daniel Kaczynski.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reports from Warsaw suggest that the Polish Foreign Secretary, Mr. Czaputowicz, is taking the lead in trying to help the United Kingdom to break the impasse by suggesting a definitive time for the backstop. Could the Prime Minister share with us some of the helpful things the Polish government is doing to help us and encourage others to follow suit?
I say, I look forward to exploring in more detail the proposals that have been put forward by the Polish Foreign Minister on this particular issue of dealing with the backstop. We have always worked well with the Polish government on these and other matters across the European Union Council, and want to continue to have that very close relationship with Poland after we leave the European Union.
Ben Bradshaw.
On the Union, Mr. Speaker, could I suggest that seeking public consent for a Brexit that looks very different from the one sold to the public in 2016 would do far less damage than tearing Scotland and Northern Ireland out of the Union in a botched Brexit against their will? So can I ask her, is her first loyalty to her party or the country?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that every decision I've been taking because I believe it is right in the national interest. I genuinely believe that we should be, as a government and as a parliament, delivering on the result of the referendum in 2016. I think that is our duty. It's very simple.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 12 days ago, the Member of Parliament for North Down warned of, in her view, that if there was a no-deal Brexit, this could be used by people wanting to agitate towards a border poll and trying to force Northern Irish people to vote to leave the UK. Does the Prime Minister agree that this is a risk, and could she confirm that no deal is not her top priority, indeed is not the priority of the government?
The position of the government is very clear. We want to leave the European Union with a deal. We want to leave with a good deal. The deal that we had negotiated has been rejected. That's why we are now asking the question across the House and talking to people and listening to people about what it is that would secure the support of this House for a deal that will enable us to leave with a good deal on the 29th of March.
The Prime Minister ruled out a second referendum on the grounds that such an action would undermine social cohesion in this country. Doesn't she accept that that displays an incredibly jaundiced view about the character of the British people?
No, it does not. I have to say to the right honourable gentleman that if he looks at the decision that was taken in 2016, there were many people who, 17.4 million people voted for us to leave the European Union. It was the highest turnout in a poll that we'd seen for some considerable time. There were many people who voted for the first time for many years, if not for the first time at all, in that referendum. And I think if we were to go back and say that we were not delivering on the result of that referendum, that would indeed damage people's faith in politics. I think it would damage our democracy.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
As today is Blue Monday, the gloomiest day of the year, will the Prime Minister cheer up at least 17.4 million people, and probably many more, by confirming that beyond a shadow of a doubt this country will have left the European Union by the 30th of March?
My honourable friend has regularly asked me this question, and my answer has not changed. First of all, I believe it is our duty to deliver leaving the European Union, and as he will know, there is a date in legislation for us to leave. It is the 29th of March. That's the end of the 2-year Article 50 process.
Dame Louise Ellman. Here, here.
Last week, the Prime Minister suffered a major defeat. Today, she hasn't come to the House with any answers, but she claims she wants to have extensive discussions on a variety of issues, both inside and outside this House. Yet meaningful discussions need time. So why is she refusing to call for an extension of Article 50? That's right.
Here, here. There were two elements in relation to my statement on this question of discussions and discussions outside the House. Of course, there are discussions we're holding in relation to the finding a deal that will secure the support of the House. And then there are also, as I referred to in my statement, discussions that in the next stage of negotiations we will be having not just within the House but outside the House as well. I believe it is important for us to work to find a deal that will enable us to leave on the 29th of March.
Helen Grant.
Does the Prime Minister agree that members of this House should be mindful of the fact that most of us were elected on manifestos that promised to honour the referendum?
My honourable friend makes a very important point. In one sense, it's a very simple point, but it is very important, which is that 80% of the votes at the general election last year were for parties which had in their manifesto that they would respect the referendum and deliver on the referendum and ensure that we leave the European Union, and that's what the government is doing.
Emma Reynolds.
Speaker, the words customs union weren't on the ballot paper in the EU referendum. Can the Prime Minister name a UK manufacturer who has said that the benefits of free trade agreements around the world, even if they were agreed quickly, would outweigh the costs of leaving the European Customs Union?
Can I say that the position that I believe will be of great benefit for manufacturers and for our economy in the future is for us to have a good trading relationship with the European Union and the freedom to negotiate those trade deals around the rest of the world, and that's what we've been working for.
Sir Desmond Swain.
How is remaining in a customs union consistent with the decision of the British people to be no longer subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court?
My right honourable friend raises an important issue. I believe when one of the reasons why people voted to leave the European Union was to leave the remit of the European Court, the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and that's what we want to deliver.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said that EU citizens in the UK will be able to stay and to continue to access in-country benefits and services in broadly the same terms as now. But is she aware that my constituents and many constituents of my honourable colleagues have actually been finding it difficult to access universal credit on the basis that they have not been staying here long enough? Will the Prime Minister look into this? Because it seems that EU citizens are already being denied their rights. It's a new hostile environment for EU nationals.
We've been very clear in the scheme that the Home Office has set out in relation to the rights that EU citizens would have. The withdrawal agreement, which I think the Honourable Lady voted against, actually sets out clearly the rights for EU citizens on us leaving the European Union. But I will, of course, ensure that the relevant department look at the issue she's raised.
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I thank the Prime Minister for saying that she will go back to the European Union to discuss the issue of the backstop particularly. When she goes, will she take with her a copy of the House of Lords report from March 2017 that says if we leave without a deal, we don't owe them any money, because that may make them more willing to talk?
Well, my honourable friend, can I say to my honourable friend that the issue of the House of Lords report was responded to by my right honourable and learned friend, the Attorney General, in the debate last week, where he was very clear that actually what the House of Lords report had looked at a particular aspect of law, but that they had themselves recognised that there may be obligations under other aspects of international law. And the advice is clearly that there would be obligations for us to pay in a no-deal situation, and I believe that we should be a country that does respect its legal obligations.
Chukaramuna.
Mr. Speaker, I've listened carefully to what the Prime Minister has said about social cohesion and division in our country. All of us worry about the far right and the threat they pose to our country, and history shows that a resurgence of the far right usually follows an economic depression, which is why avoiding no deal at all costs is essential. But does she not agree in any event that it would be wholly wrong to allow any group in society to threaten and intimidate us into not following our democratic processes and into not having votes? That is clearly unacceptable, and anyone engaging in that kind of threat, violence, intimidation should feel the strong arm of the law come down on them.
I say to the honourable gentleman that I believe it is important, and there's an important issue about some of the behaviour that we've seen, which members of this House have been the victims of, but others have been on the receiving end of aggressive behaviour as well, because they appear to hold a different view from those held by other people. It's important that we're able to have our debates, not just in this House, but in public, on these issues, with dignity, with respect, with people, yes, wanting to put their positions passionately, but respecting the right of others to hold a different view and to hold that view equally passionately. But I also believe that it's important, when this House has given a decision to the British people in a referendum, that we deliver on that.
John Whittingdale.
I thank my right honourable friend for listening to concerns felt by a number of us on these benches and for her recognition that there must be changes to the backstop. But can she also confirm that those aspects of our future relationship set out in the political declaration, which also cause some concern, that those are not legally binding and can be addressed and changed in the course of the subsequent negotiation?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that the political declaration does set out the framework for the negotiations in the future, but there obviously are elements with it, but that has to be negotiated into legal text, and as he will, I'm sure, be aware, there are elements within that text which have not identified absolutely a particular position. I referred earlier in response to a question from an honourable friend about this balance between checks at borders and alignment and regulatory alignment, and obviously that is a matter that is for the future negotiations.
Pat McFadden.
The Prime Minister has set out today and many times in recent weeks her implacable opposition to any kind of public vote to establish public consent for the terms on which we leave the European Union through a referendum. Is she as implacably opposed to a general election?
I have also said if the right honourable gentleman had heard the speech that I gave last week in the no confidence debate, he will have seen that I made it absolutely clear that I do not believe that a general election is in the national interest at this time.
Greg Hands.
Returning to issues around the World Trade Organization, one of the things that will need to be sorted out in the question of a no-deal Brexit will be what happens with some of the most favoured nation clauses. Now, if she were to put up no tariffs, barriers or checks to EU goods at all after the 29th of March, which would be very helpful in ensuring no change and free-flowing trade from our side, of course that might provoke MFN challenges at the WTO. So what assessment has the government made of the relative merit in such a scenario of carrying on with trade as it currently is vis-à-vis the risk of WTO challenges, which of course wouldn't be heard for 18 months, and any infraction would not be able to be retrospective? And does she agree with me that it may well be worthwhile, so long as the study is done, of actually pursuing that course of simply keeping the border open in the event of a no-deal Brexit?
I know that my right honourable friend, obviously from his previous position and ministerial position and his interests, has looked at this issue with great care. But of course, as we look at this issue, it isn't simply a question of the tariffs that we set for for items going across our border. There are the questions of the WTO requirements in relation to customs declarations at the border, and there are other issues which are referred to within the political declaration, such as issues relating to data, which are also relevant in this matter.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If the House votes to take time to consider options other than those which the Prime Minister has been presenting to us, will she accept that this is not an attack but a sign of the strength of our parliamentary democracy?
Say to the right honourable lady that if she is referring to the issue of an extension of Article 50, she shakes her head, but well, but the only way in which it is possible to ensure that there is more time in the negotiations with the European Union to find that resolution would be if Article 50 were extended. Article 50, as I've indicated, cannot be extended but simply by the decision of this House alone. It is a matter that is has to be agreed by the European Union as well, and I think that it is very clear that they would not be likely to allow that extension unless it was clear that there was a deal or an agreement that was coming forward as a result of that. I think it's far preferable for us, and I think as I've said, I believe we should be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March, and the discussions that I and others have been holding with members across this House are aimed at exactly being able to do that, and do that with a deal that secures the support of this House.
Maria Miller.
welcome my right honourable friend's statement and the extraordinary work that she's doing to shape our exit from the EU. And actually, Mr Speaker, can I just say, in response to the right honourable member from Exeter, who questioned the Prime Minister's commitment to our country, that there is nobody on this side of the House who would do that, and very few people outside as well. But can I also press her that if the leader of the Labour Party continues to work collaboratively with the government, that this action effectively makes no deal the more likely outcome in March? And shouldn't he just come clean and admit that?
Say to my right honourable friend, she's absolutely right. As I said, that the only way in which it is possible, other than staying in the EU, which we will not do, the only way in which it is possible to ensure that there is no deal is off the table is to agree a deal. The offer that I gave, and it remains open to the Leader of the Opposition to entertain engage in talks with us, was precisely talks about ensuring we can have a deal so that we do not leave with no deal.
David Linden.
Mr Speaker, forgive me for watching these proceedings and thinking that the Northern Irish backstop is the only issue that prohibits people from supporting the agreement. But last week when I visited Glasgow Kelvin College, which is a campus in Easterhouse, they expressed major concern about the Erasmus scheme and a lack of clarity for them. Not referring to universities, what reassurance can she give to colleges in this country about the future after Brexit?
I say to the honourable gentleman that if he looks at the political declaration, we have obviously referenced those aspects of being able to work collaboratively across with the European Union, with colleges and universities across the European Union through issues like Horizon, and also looking at the possibility of extension of Erasmus. Those are referenced in the political declaration, but they cannot be part of a legally agreed text until after we've left the European Union.
Richard Graham.
Firstly, I warmly welcome the announcement by the Prime Minister that reassures over 3 million European nationals in the United Kingdom about having their fees for registration rights waived. And although the European Commission's line on not being able to determine Member States' views on this is well known, the European Parliament's Brexit coordinator has stressed that reciprocity for British citizens in the European Union is essential. So would my right honourable friend ensure the government holds them to that pledge? And secondly, I don't understand what all the discussion about customs union today is about, because the customs union and the relationship on the trade and investment side comes at the second stage. What we're trying to get over the line is the withdrawal.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. First of all, the European Parliament were very clear that citizens' rights was their key concern in this withdrawal agreement. And we have discussed those with them, and I will continue to press both them to press Member States, but also press Member States individually to reciprocate on this issue of citizens' rights. But my honourable friend is absolutely right. There are two parts to the deal that was negotiated: the withdrawal agreement, which is the legal text about how we withdraw from the European Union, and the political declaration of our future relationship. And setting that into legal text is indeed a matter for the next stage of negotiations.
Mr. Peter Kyle.
Speaker, she's against the people's vote because she says there isn't a majority in this place and it would undermine social cohesion. Can I say to the Prime Minister that if she wants to know the majority in this place, why doesn't she test it? And may I put it to her that because she's hardly Mystic Meg when it comes to understanding the will of this place, that it would be a good thing for her to do. And secondly, there is only a very small minority, an ultra-small minority, of very, very right-wing people who are trying to undermine social cohesion in this country in order to prevent a people's vote. When did the Tory party start running away from fascists rather than standing up to them?
I have to say that comment I think was beneath the honourable gentleman today. But let me explain again to him why I say what I do about a second referendum. It is very simple. Throughout my political career, I have said, when I have seen other countries have second referendums on decisions in relation to Europe, because it didn't come out in the way that the politicians of the time wanted it to come, that it was hugely important that people accepted the result of the first referendum. This House overwhelmingly voted for that referendum. This House overwhelmingly voted to trigger Article 50. I believe we should follow through on those decisions and deliver on the vote that people took in the referendum in 2016.
John Barron.
I suggest those Remainers trying to hijack government business on the Brexit process already believe the people did not know what they were voting for when they voted to leave the EU. But now they seem to be suggesting that MPs did not know what they were doing when they voted for Article 50, given the WTO was always the backstop. Mr. Speaker, Parliament cannot become the executive, and the referendum result must be respected by Parliament. Could the Prime Minister therefore confirm, for the sake of absolute clarity on the benches opposite, that not only will we be leaving on the 29th of March, she's made that very clear, but that we will be leaving on WTO terms, if negotiations fail, terms by which we profitably trade with the rest of the world?
To my honourable friend, that we will be leaving the European Union. We will be leaving on the 29th of March. I believe we should be leaving on the 29th of March with a good deal, and that is what we are working across the House to ensure that this House can we can deliver in negotiation with the European Union, and we can find a deal that actually secures the support of this House. I believe leaving with a good deal is the best position, is the best outcome for the UK.
The Prime Minister knows that Scotland's different. Scotland overwhelmingly rejected this Tory Brexit and increasingly wants nothing to do with this impending disasters. So of all the options we've got to consider, surely at some point she accepts that Scotland must be asked whether it wants to be part of this ugly, self-defeating, isolating Brexit Britain, or whether it should determine its own relationship with the EU as an independent nation.
When we talk about honouring referendums, actually there was a referendum in 2014 in Scotland which determined that Scotland should remain in the United Kingdom, and that should be honoured by all of us in this House.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister, in her welcome statement, said that the government will consult this House on its negotiating mandate to ensure that members have the chance to make their views known. Will she consider, when she brings the agreement and political declaration in whatever form back to this House, that those words are in the motion for approval?
Well, I will certainly look at the suggestion that my honourable friend has made. Obviously, there is a technical issue about how we need to, when there is a deal that will secure the support of the House, how that motion needs to be worded such that it is clear and meets the requirements of the legislation. But I will look to see how we can ensure, I think what my honourable friend is looking for is a reassurance that the agreement to enable Parliament to have a voice in that negotiating mandate is not simply words from the dispatch box, but that is actually delivered on.
Chris Bryant.
Another week gone and still no Plan B. No Plan B next week, probably not the week after. And the clock is ticking away. Last week, the Attorney General said, if we do not legislate for legal certainty, as a matter of law alone, thousands of contracts, transactions, administrative and judicial proceedings in the EU and this country will be plunged into legal uncertainty. At the rate we're going, even if her deal had been agreed last week, she would stand no chance of getting all of this legislated for and providing legal certainty by the 29th of March. Please, 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 just own up. You're going to have to delay the 29th of March.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that obviously the Attorney General set out that position. That legal certainty would be provided by the provisions that are in the withdrawal agreement that was negotiated with the European Union. The vast majority of the withdrawal agreement actually relates to those sorts of issues. What I'm working for now is to ensure that we can get agreement on those aspects of that withdrawal agreement which people have raised concerns about, such that we can leave with a good deal, that we can ensure that we give that legal certainty to all those businesses outside. But in order to do that, it will be necessary at some point for this House to support a deal with the European Union.
Mrs. Cheryl Murray.
Mr. Speaker, it's been reported that President Macron is going to use the threat of the Irish backstop
to force the UK to give French fishing vessels a continued existing access to the UK waters. Will my right honourable friend please confirm that we are leaving the CFP on the 29th of March this year? And will she confirm that she will say to President Macron, no, no, no?
Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I will confirm that we are leaving the common fisheries policy, that we will indeed become that independent coastal state, that we will be negotiating access to our waters. And of course, for President Macron to suggest that he could use the backstop as a means of requiring us to give access to French fishermen actually will be counterproductive, because in the backstop, French fishermen would not have any access to our waters at all.
Jamie Stone.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that my views on this matter are well known to the House. Therefore, I choose my words with care. A week ago, I said this to the Prime Minister: in the event of the UK leaving the EU, what government fund will replace the European structural funds that have been such a benefit to the Highlands for many years? In her answer, the Prime Minister said it was the Shared Prosperity Fund. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Prime Minister today to give me an assurance that the Shared Prosperity Fund will find its way to the needy Highlands and Islands and not be, how shall I put it, creamed off for cherished projects in the south of Scotland or near Edinburgh or Glasgow.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I will leave him to debate the issue of which parts of Scotland require the funding. But the point of the Shared Prosperity Fund is to ensure that we tackle inequalities between communities. We want to have a focus on raising productivity. I think that's important across our country. We're going to consult widely on that Shared Prosperity Fund, how that Shared Prosperity Fund will operate, and the priorities, and the details of its operation and priorities, and those will be announced following the spending review.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All members on this side of the House stood on a manifesto in 2017 that said on page 36, "We continue to believe that no deal is better than a bad deal for the United Kingdom." Given that this House decided last week by 230 votes that the government's proposals was a bad deal, Prime Minister, if you go back to Brussels and they're not prepared to give a good deal, would she honour the Conservative manifesto commitment and leave on the 29th of March on a clean global Brexit?
My honourable friend, that of course we stood on that manifesto. I have repeated in this chamber from this dispatch box that no deal was better than a bad deal. But I also believe that it is better for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union with a deal, with a good deal. And that is what I am working with others across the House to see what will secure the support of this House such that we leave the European Union and we leave with a deal.
Clive Efford.
The Prime Minister has said that there's not a majority in this House for a second referendum, and she may be right, but there is clearly a majority against leaving with no deal. So is she saying to the House that rather than provide extra time in order to secure a deal that can pass this House, she will crash us out with no deal on the 29th of March?
Good question.
Is that if the House doesn't want to leave with no deal, then the House has to come together and agree the deal that will secure the support of the House, and that's what we're working on.
Helen Whately.
The Leader of the Opposition has told us he would rule out no deal, but he's also said he'll rule in a second referendum. It seems to me that his support for unilateral disarmament is rather similar to his approach to Brexit negotiations.
Yeah.
Can I thank my right friend, the Prime Minister, for, by contrast, sticking to her guns?
Thank my honourable friend for pointing that out. I think it is very important that the government delivers for people and that we continue to deliver. And it is interesting that I think the Leader of the Opposition, although the Shadow Trade Secretary has made a reference to the Labour Party's position on the second referendum, I don't think the Leader of the Opposition has actually identified what he believes in relation to a second referendum.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier, the Prime Minister said that to extend Article 50 would just be to defer the moment of decision. Would the Prime Minister not agree that in the current situation, where there's no consensus in the House, it's very difficult to know what the will of the people is now 2.5 years down the road amid this chaos, lack of leadership and indecision, that perhaps deferring that moment of decision is exactly what we need, and she should consider extending Article 50.
The people made their will clear that we should leave the European Union. It is this House that now needs to identify the way in which we can leave the European Union with a deal that will benefit people across the United Kingdom.
May I tell the Prime Minister that my constituents in Dover and Deal who voted Leave and Remain alike have got in contact to express concern that members of this House may be engaged in unconstitutional games and parliamentary tricks to delay or stop Brexit altogether. Will she confirm that whatever happens, we will leave the European Union on the 29th of March, and that she will not enable anyone in this House, and she will always align with the people against anyone in this House to ensure that the people's will and the referendum vote is carried through?
Can I say to my honourable friend that I absolutely agree that we should be delivering on leaving the European Union, that we have been clear that that will be on the 29th of March, and that I think those who wish to use parliamentary procedure to try and reverse the vote of the British people need to think very carefully about what they are trying to do, because there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that this Parliament voted for that referendum, this Parliament voted to trigger Article 50, and therefore this Parliament should deliver on those votes.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, with the clock ticking, and for us all to come together to agree a deal that delivers on the promises made in 2016 in the referendum campaign and rules out the disaster of a no deal, why is it exactly that the Prime Minister will not bring to this House indicative votes so she will then establish what the will of the House actually is?
To the honourable lady, once again, there is a position that is set out very clearly in the legislation, which the government will do. We will bring a neutral motion to this House. That motion will be amendable. And can I also say to the honourable lady that what we are doing is working to see what is the deal that will secure the support of the House. Of course, it has to be a deal that we can negotiate with the European Union, because the agreement, a deal by definition, has to be agreed by both sides. I believe that's the right thing for this government to do, is to be working to listen to members across this House and to be working to find that deal that will secure support.
Gareth Johnson.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that enforcing a second referendum would be the most arrogant thing that this Parliament could ever do? It would be totally wrong to effectively say to the people, you got it wrong last time, now go away and have another try. That referendum result, Mr. Speaker, wasn't some kind of take-note memo. It was an instruction to this House, and that instruction is just as valid today as it was the day after the referendum.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. This House didn't say to the British people, have this vote and we might think whether or not we agree with it and will deliver on it. We said, it is your decision. The government leaflet that, government was campaigning for Remain, but the government leaflet that went out was clear that the result would be respected, and that's exactly what this Parliament should do.
Thangham Debonair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says she wants to reach out to civil society and trade unions. So may I gently suggest to her that over the course of the next week she reaches out to the Musicians' Union, and I declare my entry in the Register of Members' Interests, to find out from them what they think a future after Brexit should look like for touring musicians, but also that she listens to Remainers in general and to try and do her best to take into account what they think so that she can try to heal this very divided country.
Can I say to the honourable lady, that is precisely why I believe it is important that we have a deal that will secure the support of this House, a deal that will respect the referendum but do it in a way that does protect people's jobs, that does give people certainty and that protects our union.
Nick Herbert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it not the case that 4/5 of members of this House voted to trigger Article 50? And in doing so, they consciously though in perhaps some cases semi-consciously, accepted that no deal would be the default option if we did not leave with a deal. If honourable members have now changed their minds, should they not be open about that and say that they now wish for a second referendum or to ditch Brexit altogether? And if they do not want that, and they do want an orderly Brexit, and they do want to prevent no deal, is not the only course open to them to agree a deal?
My right honourable friend has set out with impeccable logic what the position is. It is indeed correct that 4/5 of this House voted to trigger Article 50. That was for a 2-year process, which ends on the 29th of March this year. And if people want us to leave with a deal, they have to agree a deal.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you much, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that has brought us austerity, the benefit freeze, the two-child policy and the rape clause, all while cutting tax for the richest in our society. Yet she's got the temerity to claim it's a fundamental act of democracy, a second referendum that will undermine social cohesion in the UK. Can I ask the Prime Minister, what evidence does she have for this assertion?
I'd like to say to the honourable gentleman, he says this was a government that brought austerity. This government had to respond to the significant financial crisis and economic crisis that was left us by the Labour government when we took over in 2010. And this is this government that is bringing an end to austerity and ensuring that we will see our debt come down, ensure that we have and continue to maintain lower taxes for people. I notice it's the Scottish government that has actually been increasing taxes on people in Scotland. They might want to think very carefully about that before they talk about the impact on people.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement, particularly a reference to the backstop. And I feel that if the EU were prepared to be somewhat more flexible on this issue, then it could open the door to an acceptable agreement. In recent days, a number of my constituents have contacted me concerned that further opening of the negotiations could weaken our position on freedom of movement. My right honourable friend has always been very firm on this issue. Could I invite her to reaffirm her determination that there will be no relaxation on the current position?
I'm happy to give my honourable friend that assurance. I've always said that I believe the desire to bring an end to free movement was one of the things that led to many people voting to leave the European Union, and this government will deliver on that. There will be an end to free movement.
Wayne David.
Yesterday, in a radio interview, the Solicitor General said that he thought that agreement on a customs union would provide a way to unify this House.
Yep.
What is her response to her own Solicitor General?
My response is that actually the discussions we've been having across this House suggest that there are more varied opinions in relation to this matter and in relation to what should drive forward than a simple solution such as the honourable gentleman suggests.
Maggie through.
Speaker, I'm sure members across this House will welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to maintaining workers' rights and environmental standards. But does she agree with me that we can be more ambitious and lead the way on this, but only if we actually leave the EU with a deal?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. I believe that we can be leading the way on these around the world on these issues, but in order to do that, we want to ensure that we leave the European Union with a good deal and then have the freedom to set those very high standards.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, first of all, thank you for your statement and for your endeavours. There was a poll in Northern Ireland just last week. 70% of unionists are against another vote to leave the EU. 71% of unionists want the Brexit. 66% of unionists were against the withdrawal agreement, so heavily defeated in this House just last week. So, Prime Minister, can you confirm that you will not ignore the opinion of unionists and the backstop will have to be removed, and that Northern Ireland will continue to be an integral part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland on the same basis as England, Wales and Scotland?
Well, obviously, it is my position, it's the government's position. Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. We want Northern Ireland to continue to be able to be that integral part of the United Kingdom. I think it is right that we deliver on the vote to leave the European Union. The backstop has been identified as a key issue, and we will continue to work with the honourable gentleman and his right honourable friends and others across this House who have raised this issue to find a way through that enables us to secure a deal.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate the Prime Minister on her determination to leave the EU on the 29th of March. And does she agree with me that this has become a matter of trust between the people and politicians? And if we fail to deliver and leave on that date, that trust will be damaged irreparably?
I agree with my honourable friend that I think these decisions are about matters of trust. That is why I have been concerned about the proposals for a second referendum, because I think a second referendum would actually damage that trust between the people and politicians.
Hannah McMorrin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Brexit is a fantasy based on lies. Nothing about Brexit will make our constituents' lives any better. When is the Prime Minister going to start standing up for what is right and stop running down the clock, rule out a no deal and put this decision back to the people?
Say very gently to the honourable lady, I believe she stood on a manifesto in the general election to deliver Brexit, and that's what we're doing.
Tim Lawton.
Mr. Speaker, in warmly welcoming the Prime Minister's announcement about waiving visa fees, will she give assurances that the Home Office won't seek to recoup the cost by jacking up visa and asylum costs elsewhere? And in response to some of the points opposite, does she agree with me that it's just not compatible for any honourable member or any party which undertook to respect the result of the referendum in their 2017 manifesto now to claim they support a second vote which includes the option completely to disrespect by overturning the first one?
Yes. Well, can I say to my honourable friend that I absolutely agree with. First of all, we will ensure, obviously, as I've said, those fees will be waived, and those who have already applied or are applying during the pilot will have their fees reimbursed. Can I say to him that he's absolutely right about the point in relation to a second referendum? I think it is so important that we show people that they can have trust in their politicians by delivering on the decision that they took in 2016.
Stephen Timms.
I don't doubt that the Prime Minister has tried her level best to secure an acceptable agreement, but she's clearly failed. The scale of her defeat last week was monumental, I think largely because she's been constrained by the national economic interest. Following that failure, surely it would be right now to offer the people a vote.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, we agreed to give the people a vote. That vote took place in 2016. The people voted to leave the European Union, and this Parliament should, as this government is doing, accept the importance of delivering on that vote that people gave in the referendum in 2016.
David Duquette.
Much, Mr. Speaker. When the withdrawal agreement was made with the EU, President Macron, contrary to the text in that agreement, made a statement almost immediately that unless the UK agreed to allow EU fishing vessels the same access to our waters as they have now, talks on a wider trade deal would fail, leaving the UK in the backstop. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this is actually an empty threat and that she will stand firm when she goes back to the EU on her commitment that we will leave the CFP, future access to our fishing waters will not be tied to a deal on trade?
Yes, well, I can give my honourable friend that reassurance, and in fact, what is clear in the political declaration that the issue of access to fishing waters is separate from the issue of market access for trade. And I'm also clear that we will ensure that we leave the common fisheries policy, that we become that independent coastal state, and that we will be negotiating access to our waters in the future.
Stevens.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister before Christmas assured me in the House that there was adequate civil servants in each government department dealing with Brexit. So can she explain why the Health and Social Care Department, according to a parliamentary answer, has 385 less civil servants than it did on the 23rd of June 2016? And what does that mean for medical supplies going forward in the event of a no-deal Brexit?
I say to the honourable gentleman that the 2 points he's raised are not linked. First of all, in relation to the issue of medical supplies, the Department for Health and Social Care has been working with pharmaceutical companies and others to ensure that arrangements are in place so that medical supplies will be available in the event that we leave with no deal. The government's position is that we want to leave with a deal. That's what we're working on finding a way of the deal that will secure the support of this House.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Forgive my voice. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that if we have to leave with no deal, we're more likely to find a far more conciliatory EU after we have left than we are finding in it?
And of the honourable gentleman's indisposition, but I hope you'll take it in the right spirit if I say that there is a husky intelligibility about him. The Prime Minister.
I'm not sure it would be appropriate for me to comment on my honourable friend's husky intelligibility at this point, Mr. Speaker. But can I say to my honourable friend that I believe that it is important for this country to continue to have good relations with the European Union once we have left. And I believe that working to leave with a deal which is agreed by both sides will actually help that. There are elements, people have focused on the backstop in the withdrawal agreement and focus often on the trade aspects, the security aspects, the continuing arrangements that we will have with the European Union to enable that we can continue to work together on matters like dealing with terrorism and organised crime, I think will be important in the future.
Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Time marches mercilessly on towards the 29th of March, and it's not beyond the realm of possibility, given the current trajectory, that we'll end up in a situation on the 28th of March where the Prime Minister will have failed to agree a deal, but she will also have failed to negotiate an extension to Article 50. So she'll be faced with two options: either to see the United Kingdom crash out with no deal, or to revoke Article 50. Only one of those in that situation would be in the national interest. So what choice would the Prime Minister take?
I say to the honourable gentleman that what I'm working to is ensuring that we can agree a deal with the European Union that will secure the support of this House such that we leave on the 29th of March, but we do it with a deal.
Nigel Huddleston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that the first rule of politics is turn up?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and I hope there are those across this House who will take that message to heart and act on it.
Dr. Rupa Haq.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fact that the Prime Minister is here at all before us today to explain her Plan B that looks suspiciously like Plan A, the fact that we had a meaningful vote at all, and let's not forget, Mr. Speaker, these are only because she was compelled to do so by backbench actions, not because of her own goodwill. And I feel the goodwill is slipping away as well as time. Can I suggest to her, to prevent the old strong and stable becoming scared of scrutiny, to win back goodwill from members on both sides of this House, including many of her own ministers, can she just rule out no deal now? Where there is a will, there is a way.
Can I say to the honourable lady that she might just care to look at the record in Hansard, and she will see that far from being compelled to come to this House to give statements on the matter of Brexit, I have regularly come to this House to give statements on the matter of Brexit. I think the calculation was that certainly between October and Christmas, it was 24 hours. I have given more hours since to this House in relation to debates and statements. I have not been reluctant to come to this House to answer questions from members of this House on the issue of Brexit.
Rachel McLean.
Speaker, last Friday, 50 of my Redditch constituents joined me here in Parliament on the bus tour, and we held our own series of indicative votes, Mr. Speaker. And out of all the options, the option that was overwhelmingly preferred was to leave the EU with the Prime Minister's deal. But when I asked if anyone had changed their mind from leave or remain or remain or leave, not a single hand went up. So doesn't the Prime Minister think it's amazing that there are members opposite who think they know more about what's in my constituents' minds than my constituents?
Absolutely. Can I say to can I say to my honourable friend, she is a very assiduous constituency member of Parliament, and I note that she takes every effort to make sure that she does know the minds of her constituents, and she's very clear, I think, from that we should be leaving, and we should be leaving with a deal.
Why does the Prime Minister continue to claim that the only way to rule out no deal is either to vote for her deal or to revoke Article 50? She knows that is not the case. A third way is to put her deal to the people in a people's vote and let them choose between her deal and staying in the European Union. Why won't she admit that?
To the right honourable gentleman, from the discussions around the House, it is very clear there are those who, when they talk about a second referendum, talk about putting the deal negotiated with the European Union. We still have work to do, as I have said earlier, to people with Remain on the ballot paper. There are those who say that actually it should be a deal or no deal. And that would not rule out no deal. And then there are those who say that there should be a combination of all three of those options to be put to the British people. We put a very clear decision, a very clear option to the British people in 2016. They voted. We should deliver on it.
Dr. Caroline Johnson.
The Prime Ministers and others this afternoon have talked about manifesto commitment. In our Conservative manifesto it said, as we leave the EU we will no longer be members of a customs union. Can my right honourable friend confirm that that is still her intention?
Can I say to my honourable friend, I do stand by the manifesto commitments that we gave. I believe it is important that we continue to have a good trading relationship with the European Union. I think there are many ways in which we can do that with appropriate customs arrangements.
Fairley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From her remarks this afternoon, it seems clear that the Prime Minister wants this House to vote for a way forward that's acceptable to her personally and not just to a majority in Parliament. So can I give her a further opportunity to give a straight answer to a very simple question? Should there be a majority next week in the House for a particular way forward, will she honour that vote and instruct her government to do so? And why has she been unable this afternoon, so far, to be straight with people in giving a straight answer to that very simple question?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that I believe that the government does have a very clear instruction. I believe this Parliament has a very clear instruction that we should be ensuring that we're leaving the European Union. I believe that this is something that we have a duty to deliver. That's what I'm working on. I'm working on ensuring that we can do that with a deal which has the support of this House.
I wonder if the Prime Minister has seen the survey of members published today by the Federation of Small Business, showing that business confidence is falling, with concerns that, in their words, the danger of a serious economic shock posed by a chaotic no-deal Brexit is real and imminent. The Prime Minister has shown that she understands the need to provide certainty to business. So what assurances can she give us that there will be a deal in place by the 31st of March?
Well, I can give my honourable friend the assurance that what I am doing is working across this House to find a deal that will secure the support of this House. And as I've said, where there are changes necessary, then, and the backstop is one of those issues which has specifically been raised, then I will go back to the European Union. I want to see us leaving with a deal that gives certainty to businesses. And of course, it was the withdrawal agreement that gives the businesses the certainty of the implementation period, which enables them to prepare for the future relationship that we will have with the European Union.
Neil Gray.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's decision to waive the fees for EU nationals, but I note once again that she's 4 months behind the Scottish Government. It's clear, and I see again today, that it's her pig-headed stubbornness and ridiculous red lines that have brought us to this position, this mess of her making. So why wasn't she willing to have cross-party talks 2.5 years ago?
I've said previously, we've been listening to the comments that have been made, we've been listening to the views that have been made, we listened to the views of the Scottish Government, we listened to the views of the Welsh Government. We are now, the House has rejected the deal that we put before the House. We will now work to find a deal that can secure the support of the House.
Stephen Kerr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend agree that everyone who values our precious union in this House should remember that the Scottish nationalists will seek to take full advantage of any failure of this House to deliver an orderly Brexit to break up our United Kingdom, and that we should all redouble our efforts to find a way forward that protects and strengthens the United Kingdom.
Yes, I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. And I also say I think what we have seen, what we see in this House, what we have seen in recent weeks, is the Scottish nationalists again having only one interest, which is trying to break up our United Kingdom. Our United Kingdom is indeed precious, and it is membership of our United Kingdom that is in the economic interests of the constituents of all the SNP members of this House.
Thank you. Jonathan Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is still refusing to countenance any form of new customs union. Now, putting aside her interpretation of the referendum result on that point, because that is contested, could she give us any examples of specific products which she feels British consumers are currently paying too much for as a result of the current common commercial policy, bearing in mind things like clothing from Bangladesh is incredibly cheap in British shops, because the benefits of leaving a customs union are unclear, Prime Minister, but the costs are evidently extremely high.
The benefit of not being part of the common commercial policy within the customs union of the European Union is that it will enable us to negotiate trade deals on our own behalf around the rest of the world. We are working to ensure that those agreements that are already in place between the European Union and countries around the world will be transitioned to the United Kingdom when we leave the European Union, and then we will work to enhance those trade deals with many around the world.
Sir Oliver Hill.
I thank the Prime Minister for the change to the fees, which I think will be very welcome across the House. Does she agree with me that when we had the meeting of manufacturing MPs, a cross-party meeting, it was clear that there were a significant number of Labour members who wanted to see a deal? And does she agree with me that it's really for the Leader of the Opposition to actually try and represent his colleagues, and he should go to the meeting? It's time to talk across the aisle.
Can I thank my right honourable friend for pointing that out? It is indeed the case that there were many Labour members at that meeting who wanted to see us leaving with a deal. I have invited the Leader of the Opposition to come to talk to me about how we can find a deal that actually secures support across this House, and I think in representing his members he should be willing to talk.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite last week's historic defeat, the Prime Minister still seems hell-bent on indulging on an ill-conceived and potentially catastrophic game of Russian roulette with the lives of millions of people. But why, given the impasse that we're in, and with time running out, why is the Prime Minister so fearful of having meaningful talks without preconditions with others in this place, talks that can include ruling out a no deal, extending Article 50 and the possibility of a second referendum? Why is she so fearful of having those talks?
We've not been fearful of having talks. We have invited people to talks without preconditions. But as I said to the honourable gentleman, if he's talking about ruling out no deal, there are only the two ways to rule out no deal. Either we stay in the European Union or we have a deal. I want to see those talks so that we can ensure that we have a deal.
Dan Jarvis.
In her statement, the Prime Minister said that she would look for further ways to engage regional representatives in England, and I declare an interest as one of them. What I haven't heard her say today or on other occasions is how she thinks we can reset the relationship between Westminster and the rest of the country. How does the Prime Minister think that we can do this, and what's she going to do to ensure that people right around our country feel that they can take control of their own lives and their own futures?
I say to the honourable gentleman that we have already been exploring through, in various ways, how we can involve the elected city and regional mayors in discussions that take place about a number of matters relating to the United Kingdom. When it comes to the Shared Prosperity Fund, he will be able to input to that consultation and any views he might have as to about how we can ensure that all parts of the United Kingdom the views of all parts of the United Kingdom are reflected in that.
Brian Davis.
Having been the rapporteur, the trade rapporteur for the Council of Europe to the WTO, could I gently say to the Prime Minister that in the event of a no-deal Brexit, we'd end up our rules being made by a Council of Ministers where we'd have less say, that they would be administered by a commission where we'd have less appointees, and they'd be enforced by a panel of judges which would not be democratically elected and would overrule British courts. Is this not a betrayal of those people who voted leave? Because no deal wouldn't only invoke a hard border on Northern Ireland, but lose control and leave us in Swansea saying to me they want to vote on a deal to find out whether the promises being made are delivering their reasonable expectations, because frankly they aren't.
If the expectations of ensuring that we can have a smooth and orderly Brexit, that we can deliver those opportunities in Brexit, I believe are best delivered by having a deal. The work that we're doing currently is to see what we can have as a deal which will secure the support of this House. But it will be for members of this House, once again, to think about what they say to their constituents if they fail to support a deal that enables us to leave in that smooth and orderly way.
Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Prime Minister is engaged in protracted discussions with the EU and members of this House on the backstop, which seems to be going on as long as I can remember now and is likely to be going on for some time, it seems that it's likely that there's going to require to be an extension to Article 50. So will she be raising this with the EU when she meets with them? And by which date, in order to get a deal, does she believe that Parliament would have to agree, or else there would require to be that extension?
The Honourable Lady's question has within it certain assumptions about what is going to happen. I am working to ensure that we can get a deal across the House. I hope that all parties across this House will be prepared to enter those talks and to work with us to ensure that we can have a deal that secures the support of the House.
Jed Killen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the decision to waive the fee for the EU settlement scheme, even if it should never have been implemented in the first place. But I've spoken to several EU citizens who are completely unaware of this scheme, and there are already problems with it being reported. Does the Prime Minister agree with EU citizens groups who are saying the government communication around this scheme is inadequate, and that vulnerable people unable to prove their right to be in this country could face problems in the future?
In working very closely with groups like the 3 Million Group to ensure that we do get that message out about the scheme for those EU citizens who currently live here, that we get out the message about the rights that those citizens have. Of course, those rights were enshrined in the withdrawal agreement, which was rejected by this House last week. But we will continue to work to communicate to people what the scheme is, what the requirements are in terms of being able to show their status and get that settlement status, and also, obviously, to make sure that people know the decision that's been taken in relation to the fee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both Dundee University and Abertay University in my city of Dundee will be horrified to learn today that a no-deal scenario is still on the table. Indeed, university leaders have united to tell the Prime Minister that a no-deal Brexit could lead to, and I quote, an academic, cultural and scientific setback from which it would take decades to recover. Which part of that does the Prime Minister not understand?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, if he is concerned about the universities within his constituency and the views that they have about no deal, if he is concerned about the potential impact of no deal, then he needs to ensure that we leave the European Union with a deal. And part of that is we're working to ensure we get a deal that can be supported across the House. And I assume from what he said that when a deal comes back to this House, he will support it.
Debbie Abrahams.
The Prime Minister has said that she's listening, but I've seen absolutely no evidence that she's actually hearing what people are saying. On the indicative votes, if I could push the Prime Minister on this point, she said she's not prepared to table any indicative votes. What will she do with the motions that are, the amendments that are being put to her motion around a no deal, around extending Article 50? And if I could also ask the Prime Minister about her views on a citizens' assembly.
Minister.
Of course, if people put amendments down to the motion, which of those amendments would be subject to a vote of this, subject to debate and a potential vote of this House, would be a matter for Mr. Speaker. It is the Speaker's decision as to which amendments are chosen. And in relation to the question, I think, as I said, as we go forward in this process, as we look to the, as we're negotiating that detail of the future relationship with the European Union across many areas, which affect not just businesses, not just citizens, civil society, trade unions, those involved in security matters, we will be looking to see how we can work with those, with people to enable their voice to be heard.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's renewed commitment to the Good Friday Agreement and look forward to seeing the results of the inquiry into which Cabinet member, because it could only have been a Cabinet member who briefed the press exactly the opposite earlier on today. But given that 70% plus of the people in Northern Ireland voted for the Good Friday Agreement, does the Prime Minister intend to have discussions with the political parties in Northern Ireland that represent that 70% majority, or does she intend to decide what's best for Northern Ireland based purely on the views of the only party in that country that wanted the Good Friday Agreement to fail?
Prime Minister.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we speak regularly. Both I and indeed the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland regularly speaks with all the political parties in Northern Ireland.
Christian Matheson.
If the Prime Minister is so concerned about employment rights, and if the Prime Minister is so concerned about environmental protection, why did it take 2 years and a defeat of 230 for them to be put on the agenda? And if it's such a desperate afterthought, which it clearly is, why should we take seriously her protestations to be interested in them now?
The basis of the honourable gentleman's question is not correct. He references the commitment that we have in relation to workers' rights. Look at what we have been doing to enhance workers' rights. The Matthew Taylor report, because we recognise the importance of ensuring that the rights of workers in the new gig economy are properly protected. Look at what we've done on the environment in relation to plastics, the 25-year environment plan that we have published. We have been working on these issues. We recognise that members of this House have raised concerns to ensure that there is greater assurance given on those issues, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Harold Monaghan.
Today marks the centenary of the first sitting of Dáil Éireann, established after an all-Ireland vote in the 1918 election. In 1998, the people of Ireland once again expressed themselves in an all-Ireland vote, and the Good Friday Agreement was approved. I welcome the Prime Minister's renewed commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, but a no-deal Brexit threatens this. So will the Prime Minister now assure the House that she respects the sovereignty of the Irish people, and will she take no deal off the table?
Prime Minister.
The Honourable Lady, I think she will perhaps want to reflect on the nature of the question that she has just asked me and the way in which she has put that question. And can I just say to her, this is not a renewed commitment to the Belfast Agreement. We have consistently committed to the Belfast Agreement, and we remain committed.
Drew Hendry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will recall that the very first answer she gave at Prime Minister's questions this year was in response to my question about the EU settlement scheme. So can I warmly welcome the decision to scrap the pay-to-stay element of that scheme? But can I now ask her to go a step further and end the stress for our EU friends, neighbours and colleagues, and save the UK taxpayer money, and scrap the scheme altogether, simply guarantee their rights?
Honourable gentleman, we are guaranteeing their rights, but we want to ensure that those EU citizens are able in future to show that they have that settled status here in the United Kingdom. That's why the scheme is so important.
Oh, what a delicious choice. To McDonald's. Well, E, of course, comes before U, but on the other hand, C comes before M. Stuart C. MacDonald.
A very popular choice, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, scrapping the settled status fee is indeed a welcome step, but if the Prime Minister is not going to follow the advice of my honourable friend from Inverness, can she at least answer why is there no appeal rights in the new immigration bill for EU citizens who are refused settled status? And can she also ask
was in response
We recognise that
generation.
Set a significant period of time for people to be able to apply under this. And can I just say, we might want to talk to honourable friends, which basically encouraged me to scrap the settlement scheme as a whole. Now the honourable gentleman is saying to me that the settlement scheme should be extended for even longer.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
And don't you forget it, Mr. Speaker.
Last but not least.
The Prime Minister is, of course, to be commended for waiving the fee, as many have asked her to do. But I want to question her on this phrase she used about an enhanced status for devolved governments. Will it include her, and I mean the Prime Minister, appearing before committees of the Scottish Parliament? And when we talk about the enhanced status for the Government as opposed to the Parliament, can she tell us what concessions the Scottish Government can look forward to prove that isn't just meaningless twaddle?
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, we will set out, as I say, I will be meeting the First Minister of Scotland and the First Minister of Wales. I hope to meet both of them this week, in which I'll be able to talk to them further about the arrangements that we will have in the future for that enhanced role for the Scottish Government. Can I say to the honourable gentleman, though, on a different topic, I understand that there was some difficulty in his, he was the subject of some difficulties in his constituency from a particular part of the political spectrum in this country on Friday. I'm sorry to hear that that took place. I understand the police were able to deal with the issue, but no member of this House should be subjected to that.
I echo entirely what the Prime Minister has just said on that matter, and I think it will be something that commands universal assent across the House, and I thank her for what she has said. And indeed, for that matter, I thank all 107 backbenchers who questioned her and the Prime Minister for patiently responding. Order. Statement the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Secretary Karen Bradley.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I wish to make a statement to the House following the terrorist attack in Londonderry on Saturday evening. As the people of the city and those visiting were making the most of the renowned hospitality on offer, a crude, unsophisticated but dangerous explosive device detonated as brave PSNI officers were clearing the area. CCTV released by the PSNI shows teenagers and others passing by only minutes before the device detonated. It is sobering to think that a truly sickening outcome by those responsible was only narrowly averted. Firstly, I would like to pay tribute to the police and other emergency services who responded so magnificently in the immediate aftermath of the attack. It was through their urgent actions that we are not facing circumstances where there could have been casualties or even fatalities. A nearby hotel was busy. A fundraising event was taking place in a hall adjacent to where the device exploded. And elderly residents in sheltered accommodation were all within yards of the explosion. Those who planned this attack and who placed this crude device in a busy city centre have absolutely no regard for the people who live and work there. Mr. Speaker, honourable and right honourable members will be aware that there are a number of security alerts ongoing in Derry Londonderry today, and we are being kept informed of developments by PSNI, who are working hard, along with other agencies, to ensure that this sort of mindless disruption is minimised. But, Mr. Speaker, let us be clear, those behind the attack will never succeed. Londonderry is a city that has thrived since the signing of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement 20 years ago. Everyone can see that, and one that will continue to grow and develop despite the actions of those who seek to sow discord and division. And that's why, Mr. Speaker, the city has sent a clear message in the wake of this attack. These people and these actions have no place in their city. Political leaders, the business sector, those offering hospitality to a growing number of visitors to Northern Ireland have all spoken out to challenge those who seek to continue with these violent and futile acts. The wider community in the city have also united their voices in condemnation. We should all listen carefully to what they say. And to be clear, Mr Speaker, the city remains open for business. Londonderry's Chamber of Commerce condemned the attack, but were clear that it would not deter us from opening today and getting on with the job. The bottom line is that voices across the political, business and community spectrum are united. This is intolerable violence which has absolutely no place in our society. We all want to look forward and build a peaceful future for Northern Ireland. The small number of people responsible for this attack have absolutely nothing to offer Northern Ireland and will not prevail. Violent, dissident Republican terrorists operate in relatively small, disparate groupings. Their campaign of hatred and violence is unfortunately nothing new. Law enforcement pressure has reduced the number of national security attacks in Northern Ireland. In 2018, there was only one national security attack, compared to 5 in 2017, 4 in 2016, and a total of 16 attacks in 2015. Although there has been a reduction in the overall number of national security attacks in recent years, vigilance in the face of this continuing threat remains essential. The current Northern Ireland-related terrorism or NERT threat to Northern Ireland is severe, which means an attack is highly likely. And this attack does not change this threat level. While there have been many successes by the police and others, it is clear dissidents remain intent on killing. In attempting to impose their unwanted control on people across Northern Ireland, these groupings also choose to ignore democracy and consent principles that have been and will continue to be central to the political process. The Government has consistently made clear that terrorism will not succeed, and tackling it continues to be of the highest priority. We are determined to keep people safe and secure across the whole of our United Kingdom. Derry is a vibrant city with a bustling economy and an exciting arts and cultural scene, as demonstrated in 2013 when it was the UK's City of Culture. Success breeds success. That is also why this Government has backed Londonderry and will continue to do so. Building upon the £350 million commitment we've made towards a Belfast City deal, the UK Government is equally committed to delivering a comprehensive package of economic support for Derry and Strabane. A city deal for Derry and Strabane will boost investment and productivity, generate jobs and deliver growth and prosperity, and this activity has been supported by a number of visits by UK Government ministers. At the budget, the Chancellor of the Exchequer opened formal negotiations for a Derry and Strabane city region deal. Those negotiations are underway, and it is crucial that this unique opportunity is grasped to unlock the economic transformation that the region needs and deserves. But it is not just the UK Government who are backing Derry Londonderry. From all across the world, businesses recognise Londonderry for the great place that it is to do business, whether it is financial services firms such as Fintrue or IT company Alchemy Technology Services. New jobs are being created every day in the city. Finally, and in direct opposition to the kind of ideas and barbarism advocated by those responsible for Saturday's attack, Londonderry continues to shine as a beacon of culture and progress on the island of Ireland, as a major tourist destination and as a host for world-renowned events like the Clipper Round the World race. As Assistant Chief Constable Mark Hamilton said yesterday, it's not dissident Republicans who hold the ground in Londonderry, it's the community. Anyone who has any information should pass it to the police or anonymously to Crime Stoppers. Mr Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Vinnie Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I thank the Secretary of State for sight of other statements, and also thank her for giving a statement today on what is actually an issue that does merit parliamentary time. Like the Secretary of State, I'm bound to welcome the fact that there were no injuries in the bomb attack on Saturday, but this was not for want of care by those who planted that bomb. As the Secretary of State has said, innocent bystanders were very close. But congratulations to the PSNI, those police officers who went forward at personal risk, but who successfully evacuated the area, the hotel. They do deserve our thanks. And I think within that context, I share with the Secretary of State that message of congratulations to them. It's right as well that this attack has received universal condemnation from the DUP through to Sinn Féin across the different communities in Derry. And of course, it's now an opportunity for the House of Commons to also add its voice to that condemnation. Derry as a city has seen enormous progress over the last 20 years. And in that context, can I ask the Secretary of State, obviously some of the businesses will have been affected by Saturday's attack. Will there be, where appropriate, the necessary support for those businesses to get back up and running? But of course, we also know that some 40 families are out of their homes in the Cregan, and in that context, again, can we be assured that all due care is taken to look after their welfare? But, Mr Speaker, if I can refer now to the security situation, we know that the situation in Northern Ireland has been severe over at least the last decade and more. In that context, the PSNI numbers, whilst I strongly welcomed the 300 extra officers that the Secretary of State announced recently, those were Brexit-related additions. They will take time to train. The PSNI is still well below its pattern recommended numbers. Will the Secretary of State talk to the Chancellor now and make sure that we can see the numbers of the PSNI return to those levels necessary to confront the challenges of ordinary policing, as well, of course, of the type of situation that they face today and over the weekend? And the same, Mr Speaker, this United Kingdom of ours faces many different challenges. My own home city of Manchester saw this not so long ago in the arena. We know the attacks that took place outside the House of Commons and others. So the security services themselves are under some strain. She will not want to comment direct. Can we have an assurance that, as far as Northern Ireland goes in particular, that we've got an adequacy of those security personnel? But, Mr Speaker, as well, in the context of security, we've got to look at those things that can have a material impact. And actually, symbols and words make a difference in Northern Ireland. I was grateful to hear the Prime Minister rule out earlier on that there will be no change to the Good Friday Agreement. That's right and proper. But can I say that when we still hear talk from members of this House about the possibility of crashing out of the European Union, of a hard Brexit, which will mean a hard border across the island of Ireland, then this is irresponsible. And hope the Secretary of State will join me in saying that this cannot be allowed to happen. We cannot face a situation where we give succour to those who would do us harm by the erection of that hard border. Mr Speaker, on top of that, normal politics doesn't function at the moment in Northern Ireland. If we are going to see the advance on the reconciliation process that was begun 20 years ago with the Good Friday Agreement, we need to see a return to normal politics. Because if politics can't offer change, if politics can't offer the hope of change, frankly, we give an easy gift to those who would do us all harm, and we cannot allow that. Now, there is a challenge then, and I say this to politicians from Northern Ireland in this House, but beyond. It is now a time for them to take responsibility. It's time for them to take the venom out of politics. It's time for them to take the risk that we'll begin to establish those institutions which we need to make democracy work. Take that risk. Get the Stormont Assembly back up and running. That is something that people have got to commit to. But if I can also gently say to the Secretary of State that she herself cannot put the return of Stormont into the too hard to handle for now box. We've got to see some urgency in bringing Stormont back together. And Mr Speaker, can I ask the Secretary of State two specific things? One, will she commit now to resumption of those five-party talks that could see a return to the normalcy of politics delivering change, because that is fundamental in the light of what happened on Saturday. But I also would make an offer to her that she may want to take up. I will travel with her to Derry. I will travel with her to meet local politicians and the local community to show that this House of Commons is absolutely unified in its condemnation of terror and in its desire to say that there is a better way, and politics must offer that better way.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for his comments, including his thanks to PSNI and also his steadfastness in the universal condemnation of everyone in this House of the act that we saw on Saturday night and on other activities. And I will be visiting the North West again soon, as I do regularly, but I will check my diary and see if we can do some sort of joint visit, because it looks like more than one wants to come. But I think he makes a good point that it makes a very clear message to people across Northern Ireland about the commitment of this House to their safety, their security and their prosperity. He talked about the security situation and the numbers of PSNI. I want to be clear with him that this government has always protected and provided funding for counter-terrorism related work in Northern Ireland, £230 million in the last Parliament, £160 million in this one. On top of this, cross-government spending on counter-terrorism right across the UK will increase by 30% in real terms over this Parliament. And I can also give him the comfort that he needs with the Home Secretary sat next to me, that there is adequate funding for our security services and others to enable them to do the very, very difficult work that they carry out. I also want to repeat what the Prime Minister said in her statement, that despite press reports, there is absolutely no desire by anybody in this government to see anything other than upholding in full the Belfast Good Friday Agreements, our commitments and those structures and institutions. And I too want to see those structures and institutions back where they should be. I want to see that Parliament building on the Hill instalment busy, active, making decisions and doing the right thing by the people of Northern Ireland, by those politicians in Northern Ireland. And I do want to see those talks resume as soon as possible, and not least because things like, not just the institutions, but things like the North-South Ministerial Council are missing, and these are important matters. And also, of course, the matters that the Prime Minister spoke about in her last statement regarding our future relationship with the European Union and the role the devolved administrations have in that. But I also do want to make one final point, and that is to be clear that nobody should try and draw any connection between what happened on Saturday night and any of the discussions that we are having in this place or with our friends in Europe. The attack that happened on Saturday night is a result of a threat level that has been in place since before the Brexit vote. It is something, these are plots and activities that these people have been working on and trying to carry out for many, many years. And we need to be clear with them that those activities are not welcome, that the people of Northern Ireland do not want to see this kind of activity on their streets. But this has absolutely nothing to do with Brexit or anything close to it.
Owen Patterson.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Secretary of State for her statement and for its measured and above all balanced tone, and also welcome the comments from the Shadow Secretary of State. She touched on the PSNI. This could have been a really hideous incident, Mr. Speaker, and it's very much thanks to the professionalism of the PSNI officers who spotted a suspicious car and then very professionally moved people away that there was no injury. So in the light of that, she mentioned the significant funds that the coalition government gave to the PSNI and security forces, and we have thwarted a large number of incidents thanks to that. She provided a very welcome £16 million just before Christmas for another 300 officers. Where is that money now? Has it been given to the PSNI, and when will it be transformed into real officers on the streets?
Mr. Speaker, can I thank my right honourable friend who has such significant experience and knowledge of Northern Ireland, and he is right to pay credit to the PSNI. I've spoken to the Chief Constable a couple of times over the last few days, inevitably, and I too have paid tribute to those officers, those individual officers who turned up for what they believed would be a normal Saturday evening shift to find themselves confronted with that kind of incident, and their bravery and their actions are why we haven't seen this being a far worse incident than it is. In terms of the funding for PSNI, I think perhaps in terms of exactly where the funding is at the moment, it perhaps would be better if I write to my right honourable friend so that I can give him absolute clarity on where it is and how long it will take to recruit those 300 police officers.
Gavin Newlands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and can I also thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of her statement. These utterly shameful and cowardly attacks carried out in Derry on Saturday evening, along with the ongoing incidents in the city, are a reminder, if any were actually needed at all, that many of the terrorists have not gone away. And for the avoidance of doubt, we on these benches utterly condemn these pointless and shameful attacks and welcome the 5 arrests that have been made thus far. On behalf of the SNP, I'd also like to extend our thanks and praise for the rapid response of the PSNI and the emergency services to these incidents, and our thoughts with all those affected, including the delivery driver whose van was hijacked after a gun was held to his head. Now, in this place we have the Lord's amendments to the Counter-Terrorism Bill being debated tomorrow, which I look forward to, but other interventions in this place from many in the benches opposite making spurious, uninformed assertions of the backstop, the border and the Good Friday Agreement risk, if they were to get their way, making an already fragile situation more dangerous. Now, I fully accept, as the Secretary has just alluded to, that Saturday evening itself had little to do with the current situation, but as it is, it's pretty clear to see that the power vacuum at Stormont is not conducive to a stable political situation, and the ERG approach should not be given any consideration whatsoever. Now, in response to the Shadow Secretary of State, she said she wanted to see it happen, but can she outline what steps her government are taking to restore the institutions that were formed to uphold the Good Friday Agreement, and what is being done to prevent groups such as the new IRA taking foothold? And also, the front line of counter-terrorism is community police, community groups and others who operate on the front line. And what steps is she taking to strengthen frontline resources and services? And I have to consider if positive action is taken on the last 2 steps, then she'll certainly have the SNP support in taking that forward.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the honourable gentleman for support for future activities? I do appreciate it. In terms of frontline policing, I've visited the Strand Road police station in Londonderry on a couple of occasions to meet those frontline officers. It's such an important part of the work that is done by PSNI, and also the fact that there are PSNI officers from all parts of the community serving in Derry, Londonderry is incredibly important, because it does mean that they can be true community officers on the ground, understanding what is happening. And it is the intelligence work that they do and the work that they have that helped them to, although there was a coded warning, the PSNI officers had identified the vehicle and were starting to take action. And he's right also, of course, to comment on the delivery driver. It must have been a horrendous experience, again, for a pizza delivery driver to find a gun to their head and be put in that situation. There can be no excuse and for the activities of the terrorists on Saturday night, and we all condemn it fully. I will just finally say that in terms of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement and the comments that have been made, again I reiterate what the Prime Minister said, that we stand steadfast in our support for the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. But he's right that there is a power vacuum in Northern Ireland at the moment. I want to see that power vacuum filled. I'm not sure that the ERG have a specific policy on that, but I think they probably agree with me that we want to see politicians back in Northern Ireland doing the job that they were elected to do, which is making decisions on behalf of their constituents.
Doctor.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the 2-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thulis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rape clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK Government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rape clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.